In a grand castle, a young girl with long red hair named Letitia sneaks through the hallways, trying to avoid the watchful eyes of the adults who might drag her back to her lessons. As she hurries toward the doors, desperate to taste a moment of freedom, she trips and falls, losing precious seconds that would have assured her escape. As she watches the doors shut to a close, she tries to reopen them only to find Clark, the crown prince, behind her, crashing all her hopes of a clean getaway. On a bright, sunny day in the countryside, 7-year-old Letitia enjoys her carefree life, playing with her dog, John, and basking in the love of her family and the things she enjoys doing without the worry of responsibilities. Her laughter fills the air until her father receives a letter. The cheerful expression on his face quickly fades as her father reads the contents of the letter. He realizes that this letter will not just change her family, but will change Letitia as a whole. However, Letitia's mother calls for her, brimming with excitement, but through her giddiness, she fails to tell her daughter what caused her sudden happiness, since for her, the news is a joyful one and needs to be celebrated. Curious and slightly confused by her mother's delight, Letitia leaves her spot on the lush grass to investigate. When her mother offers no real explanation, Letitia turns to her father for answers. Kneeling to her level, he gently informs her that she will soon move to the castle to learn how to become a princess. While her mother beams with pride, Letitia bursts into tears, devastated at the thought of leaving her beloved home and family behind. She clings to her father, hoping that she will not have to leave her happy life. Before long, the carriage is prepared and her older brother Nader is ready to escort her to the castle. The journey feels endless. Letitia, bored and longing for distraction, tries to engage her stoic brother in conversation, but he barely responds. Eventually, she dozes off, missing the breathtaking view of the town as they approach the castle. Upon arrival, Nader wakes her and helps her out of the carriage. As they enter the castle grounds, Letitia notices a group of noble women whispering about her. Their gossip stirs unease, but there's no time to linger. She is soon led to a room where she is left to enter alone. Letitia hesitates, looking back for her brother, but a stern-looking woman interrupts. The woman introduces herself as Layla, her tutor, and wastes no time reprimanding Letitia for her timid demeanor. When Letitia meekly attempts to introduce herself, Layla scolds her, instructing her to stand tall and speak with confidence. After being told to include her title in her introduction, Letitia tries again, only to be criticized for lacking pride and composure. Forced to repeat herself multiple times, Letitia is overwhelmed by the harsh treatment. Unable to hold back, she bursts into tears, calling out for her mother and father as a wave of homesickness washes over her. Layla, unmoved, chastises Letitia for her unladylike behavior. The lack of compassion deepens Letitia's sorrow since she is not used to the harsh treatment back in her home. That evening, she continues to cry in her new room in a manor near the castle. Nader visits her room, offering a few stern words of encouragement, urging her to endure the rigorous training required to become a princess, since this is her new life. Through tearful eyes, Letitia looks at him and declares her wish to return home. She confesses her dislike for her tutor and her longing for her old life. Her brother sternly tells her that running away would only make things harder for her and her family. He adds that the decision for her to become a princess is final, and she must learn to face it. Calming down from her outburst, Letitia solemnly agrees to stay and continue her lessons. Seeing her resolve, her brother offers a rare, kind smile and encourages her to do her best, knowing that her sister is strong and will be able to face her future. Before leaving, he introduces Lily, a maid entrusted to care for Letitia in her family's absence. That evening, Lily gently reviews Letitia's lessons and tells her to prepare for bed, reminding her that another day of training awaits. At the break of dawn, Lily enters Letitia's room, letting sunlight stream in to help wake her. Letitia struggles to get up, snuggling on her pillow despite being half awake. However, she soon snaps out of her drowsiness when faced with Layla's sharp reminders about her posture when they arrive at the castle for her lessons. Layla circles her like a hawk, pointing out flaws and tapping her shoulders to correct her stance. Once satisfied with Letitia's posture, she orders her to practice walking gracefully. To ensure she moves with noble poise, Layla places a book on Letitia's head and instructs her not to let it fall. On her first attempt, Letitia stumbles with a single step forward and the book tumbles to the ground. Her tutor scolds her sharply, commanding her to try again. Tears prick Letitia's eyes, but she puts on a brave front as she remembers her brother's words. She obediently retrieves the book and balances it once more, slowly removing her hands from the book so she can get back into position. This time, she manages a few steps before it falls again. Layla tells her to persevere, firmly adding that crying will not help her. The following morning, Letitia wakes up feeling weary and disheartened from the previous day, but dutifully prepares for another round of lessons, knowing that appearing drowsy in the castle will only earn her another round of scolding. This time at the castle, she learns proper dining etiquette. Layla instructs her on how to hold a spoon correctly and sip soup with elegance and without making a noise. Letitia successfully follows most of the instructions on her first attempt but falters when she leans too far forward, causing her to forget her posture. When she is reprimanded for her slip-up, instead of crying, she accepts her mistake and tries again with a neutral expression, refusing to show emotions since she learned it would not help her to argue. Later, during a dance lesson, Letitia stumbles and falls, forgetting the intricate steps and unable to keep up with the pace of the music and her tutor. Her tutor reprimands her for her poor memory, as dancing is essential for nobles. Layla extends a hand to help her up so she can try again. Understanding that failure is part of the process and accepting that she will be taking lessons till she is eventually married to the prince, Letitia takes Layla's hand and tries again. Years pass, transforming Letitia from a spirited 7-year-old into a composed, neutral, but charming young lady. Her once bright smile fades into a calm, practiced expression. She now moves through her lessons with ease, completing every task with flawless precision, amazing several noble women who were also taking etiquette lessons. One afternoon, as Letitia answers questions during a history class, her tutor, Layla, observes her progress. The young woman's clear, confident responses leave Layla impressed. The girl who once cried over balancing books now exudes grace and confidence, embodying the princess she was trained to become, meaning she had succeeded in creating a queen-to-be. During dance practice, Letitia's dance partner is her fiancé, Clark, and later joins in for afternoon tea. While the prince speaks animatedly during their time together, Letitia remains stoic and distant, her lack of engagement clear. Even when the wind blows, she remains as poised as possible, the light in her eye a distant memory of the girl she once was. At a grand dinner ball, Letitia becomes the center of attention as she descends the staircase wearing a stunning blue gown. The nobles marvel at her beauty and grace, buzzing with excitement for the upcoming royal wedding. As she steps into the main hall, she greets her elder brother calmly as he does the same. Just as the evening seems to unfold smoothly, Clark calls out to Letitia to introduce her to someone. Letitia's composure falters as she notices Clark escorting a young woman named Brianna to the ball. The sight of another woman clinging to the prince's arms stuns not only Letitia, but also the other nobles. The murmurs grow louder as Clark apologizes, explaining that he cannot accompany Letitia for the evening because he has promised to be Brianna's escort. At first, Letitia appears taken aback, her expression hinting at heartbreak. However, to everyone's shock, her reaction is anything but typical. Instead of anger or sadness, Letitia's face lights up with pure joy. Breaking her carefully maintained demeanor, she lets out a triumphant cheer that echoes through the hall. She skips over to her brother, reminding him of a promise he once made. Nader's expression shifts as he realizes the situation. Letitia has long sought to have her engagement to Clark annulled. During one of their arguments, she had proposed a solution. If Clark ever fell in love with another woman, the engagement could be easily dissolved, as it had been arranged by their parents. Nader had offhandedly promised that if such a situation arose, he would help convince their father to cancel the arrangement, believing that it would never happen. Now, as Clark openly displays his affection for Brianna by allowing the woman to loop her arm around his own arm, Nader has no choice but to honor his word to his sister. Relieved and overjoyed, Letitia continues her celebration, even approaching Brianna to thank her for stealing her fiancé. She gleefully recounts the grueling lessons she endured to prepare for her role as a princess. Endless piles of books, tiresome etiquette training, and countless cups of tea. Brianna is bewildered, unable to interrupt Letitia, and decides to listen as Letitia humorously describes her struggles. To everyone's further astonishment, Letitia gives Brianna a hearty slap on the shoulder, thanking her again before rushing toward the exit. Clark, stunned by her unrestrained excitement, attempts to follow her, but Letitia is already near the castle doors. Turning back briefly, she thanks Clark for his care, wishes him happiness with Brianna, and expresses hope that the kingdom will prosper under his future reign. Clark, left speechless by her sudden transformation, watches as Letitia cheerfully calls for her carriage. She returns to her manor, eager to share the news with Lily. Upon arriving home, Letitia bursts through the doors, calling for Lily. The maid hurries to meet her, shocked to see her return so soon. Letitia, still bubbling with excitement, announces that she will be moving far away now that her engagement to the prince has been called off. Lily, baffled by the news, struggles to process what she's hearing. Yet nothing can dampen Letitia's exuberance. She laughs, declaring her freedom from the life she never wanted, ready to embrace the adventures that await her. Letitia expresses her desire to move near the border, as far away from the castle and its influence as possible, believing it is the only way to truly leave behind the life she despises. As she discusses her plans with Lily, her brother Nader arrives, looking visibly tired from the situation. He suggests Alberta Village as their destination, explaining that the family owns a villa there. Located deep in the countryside with minimal staff required, it seems like the perfect escape. The idea of Alberta Village excites Letitia. She recalls its serene rivers and lush forests, an ideal setting for the carefree life she has always dreamed of. Deciding to head there, she declares her intention to leave by morning, but Lily hesitates. She points out the difficulty of preparing for such a journey in such a short time. Letitia reassures her that they will travel light, bringing only the essentials. She then turns to Lily, asking her to stay by her side. For 10 long years, Lily has been her unwavering support and closest friend through the grueling lessons and rigid expectations. Letitia cannot imagine starting a new life without her. Lily smiles warmly and agrees, promising to follow her wherever she chooses to go, even if it means adopting a simpler life in the countryside. Overjoyed by Lily's response, Letitia throws her arms around her, her relief and excitement evident. Watching the scene unfold, Mater lets out a weary sigh. The castle feels strangely quiet without Letitia. Even the nobles who frequently visit remark on the absence of her presence, admitting they miss seeing the young princess going through her lessons. They whisper among themselves about the disappointment of Letitia's engagement to the prince being called off. Many believe the wedding would have been a perfect union, a symbol of harmony for the kingdom. However, they quickly shift their focus, deciding to remain cordial and welcome Brianna, who has now taken Letitia's place as Clark's future bride and is undergoing princess lessons. In the garden, Sebastian, one of the castle's butlers, approaches two noble women engaged in a quiet discussion. He informs them that the queen wishes to hear their first-hand account of the ball, where the engagement between Letitia and Clark had ended. Before they can respond, a loud scream of anguish interrupts their conversation. The group turns toward the source of the noise and realizes it is coming from inside the castle. Brianna, the new student of the etiquette tutor Layla, is struggling for the infamous lessons. Inside, Brianna is on the edge of tears as Layla critiques her every move. Despite her best efforts, Brianna cannot seem to meet the strict tutor's expectations. She remembers Letitia's words at the ball, where the former princess had casually warned her about the grueling training she would endure. Brianna had dismissed it at the time, but now she realizes how accurate Letitia's description was. Meanwhile, far from the castle, Letitia basks in her newfound freedom. At her family's countryside villa, she rolls around on the soft grass, laughing and enjoying the simplicity of nature. Surrounded by lush greenery, she feels alive again. Free from the rigid structure of palace life, she calls out to Lily, urging her to join in lying on the grass to enjoy the warm sunshine. Lily, ever the dutiful maid, declines but watches Letitia with a fond smile. Letitia eventually gathers her fishing gear, announcing her intention to visit a nearby town after catching a few fish. She asks Lily if there's anything she needs, but Lily assures her they have all they require. She wishes Letitia a safe and enjoyable trip. Letitia skips off happily, walking through the forest with her gear in hand. She muses to herself, pretending to narrate her thoughts to an imaginary audience, joking that moving to the countryside has even improved Lily's mood since she no longer has to scold Letitia about her manners. Reaching a peaceful spot by the river, Letitia sets up her gear and carefully selects her favorite lure. Excited to try it, she approaches the water with practiced precision and casts her line. Almost immediately, she feels a bite. Letitia begins to reel it in, her excitement growing, but suddenly she loses her footing when a familiar voice startles her. Before she gets the ground, Clark catches her. The force of her stumble also pulls the fish from the water, landing it on the riverbank nearby. Letitia, focused entirely on her catch, barely notices the prince holding her until he speaks, congratulating her on her impressive haul. Realizing the voice is indeed Clark's and that she is currently in his arms, she panics. Breaking free from his hold, she demands to know why he is in the countryside. Clark simply smiles at her, his expression as calm and easygoing as ever, leaving Letitia suspicious of his unexpected arrival. Taking a break from her fishing, Letitia roasts some of her catch over an open flame, savoring the fresh taste of her hard work. The simplicity of the meal brings her joy, but she can't help noticing Clark's puzzled gaze fixed on her. She asks what is wrong, breaking his thoughtful silence. Sitting on a nearby rock across from her, Clark admits that he is confused by her earlier action of returning the first fish to the river. Letitia explained that the fish was too small to keep. She added that she often returned fish if she felt she had caught too many, emphasizing the importance of taking only what you need from nature. Clark is amazed by her insight, impressed by this side of Letitia he had rarely seen during her time in the castle. Misinterpreting his look of admiration as curiosity about her food, Letitia offers him one of the fish near the fire. Excited to experience something new, Clark eagerly reached for the fish, ignoring her warning about the stick being hot. He yelped slightly as he burned his fingers but managed to grab it. Undeterred, he took a bite, only to burn his tongue on the still hot meal. After letting it cool, he tried again and was delighted by the savory flavor, remarking how much better it was compared to the often stale or cold food served in the palace. Letitia explained that palace meals were served cold to prevent nobles from burning their tongues, a custom rooted in etiquette rather than practicality. Clark nodded in agreement, savoring another bite of the freshly grilled fish. As she watches him eat, Letitia becomes curious about his sudden appearance and intentions but chooses not to press the matter just yet. After finishing her meal, Letitia makes her way to the nearby town, but she feels a level of unease due to Clark silently trailing behind her. Upon arriving, she proudly displays her catch to the villagers, who marvel at the size of the fish. She credits her success to a new lure she had crafted herself. One of the villagers suggested she sell the lure, praising her skill and noting how her handmade lures consistently yielded excellent catches. Pleased by the idea of helping the community, Letitia announced that she had already crafted several and would be putting them up for sale at Sam's shop. Clark, overhearing the conversation, is shocked to learn that Letitia had made the lure herself. He expresses concern about her handling sharp tools, worrying she might hurt herself in the process. Letitia's friends give Clark wary looks, suspicious of the unfamiliar man following her so closely. Sensing their unease, she reassures them, explaining that Clark is a good man and a trusted friend. However, she deliberately withheld the fact that he was the crown prince of the kingdom. As the townspeople gathered to greet Letitia, they offered her fresh vegetables and produce, grateful for her continued visits. Children also begged for her attention and advice. After showing Sam her new lures, Letitia spends some time playing with the children while Sam and Clark watch her fondly from a distance. Sam smiles as he tells Clark that ever since Letitia returned to their village, the place has become much livelier. He adds that despite her noble status, Letitia treats everyone as equals and makes an effort to learn about their lives, earning their admiration and love. Clark, listening thoughtfully, begins to wonder aloud if taking Letitia away from the village would mean robbing her of her happiness. Letitia's old dog, John, approached Clark, looking up at him with sad eyes. Clark reaches over to pet the dog, gently reassuring him that he will make Letitia happy. On their way back to the villa, Clark offers to carry Letitia's materials, but she declines, insisting she can carry her own weight. She adds that she doesn't trust anyone else with her precious fishing gear. As they walk, Letitia reflects on her current life. She admits that this simpler existence suited her far more than the life of a queen, because she loves nature, climbing trees, and even has a foul mouth, hardly traits of someone destined to rule a kingdom. Clark suddenly stopped to gaze at a nearby field, his face lighting up at the sight of sheep and horses grazing peacefully. Letitia notices his childlike excitement and informs him that she owns the flock and the horses. She explained how allowing them to graze freely on fresh grass was healthier than relying solely on fodder, as it promoted better growth and well-being. Clark, once again amazed by her practical knowledge, listens intently as she mentions her desire to study more about sustainable living in the countryside. As they continue their conversation, a large white horse approaches them. Letitia pets it affectionately, whispering an apology for the noise they were making. The horse then turns to Clark, who reaches out and strokes it fondly. Letitia couldn't help but be captivated by the way Clark seemed to shine when surrounded by nature. For the first time, she notices how attractive he looks, and his charm is evident in his relaxed state. She realizes that she had overlooked this side of him during their time in the palace, too preoccupied with finding ways to end their engagement. Lost in thought, she didn't notice Clark calling out to her until he asked her if something was wrong. Snapping out of her daydream, Letitia decides to confront him directly. She asks him why he had come to the countryside so suddenly. Clark easily answers that he needs a breath of fresh air before returning to his royal duties. Letitia remains suspicious, knowing that Clark is far more responsible than what he is claiming to do. Realizing he couldn't fool her, he admitted that he had enjoyed seeing her different expressions, a refreshing contrast to the stoic and reserved girl he had known in the palace. He also tells her that she hasn't changed, hinting that he may have known Letitia before she put up the persona of the prime and proper lady at the castle. Letitia was utterly confused by Clark's parting words. Before she could question him further, he calmly announces that their engagement is still valid and assures her that he will return for her soon. Without waiting for her response, he leaves, leaving her in a whirlwind of confusion. When Letitia returns to the villa, she immediately calls out for Lily. Lily asks why Letitia seems so distressed. Letitia, cutting straight to the point, declares her desire to elope with her. Lily firmly refuses, pointing out that not only are they both women, but they share no romantic feelings for each other. Lily mentions that Nader has arrived to speak with her. Realizing her brother might have some answers regarding Clark's sudden visit and their still active engagement, Letitia storms into the room where Nader is waiting. Upon seeing her, Nader sighs at her unceremonious entrance. Letitia, ignoring his reaction, demands an explanation. Heaving a deep breath, Nader explained that Clark had never formally ended their engagement. It was simply something Letitia had assumed after seeing him with another woman. Nader went on to clarify that Clark had escorted Brianna to the ball to provoke jealousy in Letitia, hoping to break through her stoic demeanor. Though the plan didn't quite succeed, it had achieved something else. Letitia had smiled and appeared to enjoy herself for once, a rare sight from those accustomed to her neutral expressions. Their conversation gets interrupted when Brianna, who had been sitting nearby, suddenly speaks up. Frustrated at being overlooked, she demands their attention. Focusing on Letitia, Brianna pleads with her to return to the castle, admitting that she can no longer endure Layla's grueling princess lessons. For the first time, Letitia felt a connection with someone who truly understood the hardship of those lessons. Taking Brianna's hands, she wished her luck in her future roles, seeing her as a kindred spirit. But Brianna quickly pulls away, stating that Clark had already declared he would marry only Letitia and produce children with her. Letitia freezes, both embarrassed and bewildered by this revelation. Before she can fully process it, her parents arrive. Her mother immediately begins scolding her for her behavior, while her father attempts to pacify her, only to be reprimanded as well. Brianna watched the entire exchange with amusement, intrigued by their dynamic. That evening, Letitia resolves to run away. She knew that as long as she stayed in any of her family's properties, she would always be found. Waiting for the cover of night, she carefully makes her way to the front door. Just as she thinks she is free, her cloak gets stepped on. Turning around, she sees Brianna. Letitia begs her for freedom, promising to help her win Nader's affection in return. Surprised but intrigued by the offer, Brianna agrees and lets her go. As Letitia disappears into the forest, Nader steps out of the shadows, having overheard their conversation. Shaking his head, he decided to let his sister enjoy her fleeting freedom. Skipping joyfully through the forest, Letitia is reveled in her newfound liberty. Her happiness, however, is short-lived. Out of nowhere, Clark appears, catching her mid-skip. Holding her firmly in his arms, Clark smiled brightly and asked her opinion on what dress she'd prefer for their wedding reception. Letitia, stunned by his sudden appearance, flatly tells him that now is not the time to discuss such a matter. Another fine morning greeted the castle as sunlight streamed through its large, ornate windows, casting a warm and inviting glow on the castle walls. Queen Laura makes her way towards the servants' quarters, her usual grace accompanied by a few worried escorts. Her unexpected presence in this seldom visited area of the castle caused a stir among the staff. Spotting Sebastian, one of the butlers, she calls out to him playfully, drawing his attention. Startled, Sebastian turns quickly, not even bothering to mask his surprise. Politely, he advises the queen to return to the main castle, clearly uncomfortable with her wandering in this unfamiliar part of the estate. The queen dismisses his concerns and inquires about her son, Prince Clark, asking for his whereabouts. Sebastian explains that the prince was not scheduled to return to the castle until the following day. Unsatisfied with his response, she shifts her focus, asking about Letitia, struggling briefly to recall her name. She mentioned wanting to meet her son's fiancé soon, remarking on the commotion Letitia had caused during the recent ball. Her face brightens with fondness and genuine excitement as she speaks about Letitia, and her curiosity about the young woman is clear. Meanwhile, back at the villa in Alberta Village, Clark carries Letitia over his shoulder as she flails in protest. Her resistance proved futile, and eventually, she resigned herself to her situation, going limp. Clark continues his conversation with her parents, offering an apology for his unannounced visit. Nader enters the room, announcing that Clark's carriage is ready for the journey back to the castle. Sensing an opportunity, Letitia turns her attention to her brother, pleading with him to intervene and convince everyone to let her stay. To her dismay, Nader ignored her completely, as did most of the others in the room. Her frustration grows as she notices Lily avoiding her gaze. Lily eventually mouths a message to Letitia, wishing her a happy marriage. The words hung heavily in the air, leaving Letitia confused and anxious. Before she can fully process Lily's message, Clark declares their imminent departure. Realizing his intent, Letitia redoubles her efforts to escape, thrashing wildly and even landing a blow on his head in her desperation. She berates herself for not training harder, wishing she were strong enough to fight back. As the carriage began its journey back to the castle, Letitia gazed longingly out the window, her thoughts filled with regret at leaving her peaceful life behind. She silently wishes that Lily had been allowed to accompany her, feeling the weight of loneliness settling in. Clark, seated across from her, breaks the silence with a question, asking if she now hated him for taking her away. Letitia turns to him and denies hating him, leaving Clark with a glimmer of hope that he might win her over. Sensing an opportunity to connect, Clark asked if she had ever truly seen him as a man. Letitia, taken aback, avoids answering directly. Instead, she reflects on her past indifference, realizing that she had only ever seen him as a presence she was obligated to marry, not as an individual with his own qualities. As the night wore on, Letitia's eyelids grew heavy and she drifted into a light sleep. Suddenly, she feels a warm touch on her hands and wakes with a start. To her surprise, Clark had moved to sit beside her, his demeanor calm and sincere. He expresses his joy at finally being able to speak with her without the constraints of formality. Letitia corrects Clark, reminding him that they had spoken several times throughout their engagement. However, Clark counters her statement, explaining that while they had talked before, she had never truly looked at him or allowed herself to be honest. As he leaned in further, his hand reached out to gently grasp a strand of her long red hair, brushing it against his lips with a soft fondness. Letitia froze, unsure of how to respond, her heart racing as his hand cupped her face, drawing her attention solely to him. His gaze was intense yet gentle as he edged closer, and her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a vivid memory of Brianna's telling her that the prince had announced his desire to have children with her. Flustered and overwhelmed, Letitia pushes him away in a burst of panic. Clark stumbled backward, landing unceremoniously on the floor of the carriage. Realizing what she had just done, she stammers an apology. To her surprise, Clark only laughs softly, brushing off the incident with a carefree smile. He climbs back into his seat, now sitting closer to her than before. He pulled out a thick cloak and draped it over both of them, suggesting they get some rest. Before she could protest, Clark leaned his head against her shoulder, his expression calm and content. For him, this moment of closeness was something he had long yearned for. As he murmured a good night, his voice carrying warmth, Letitia sat rigidly, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. By the time morning arrived, the carriage had come to a stop at the royal castle. Clark urges Letitia to get up, asking her to come with him to see something special. She follows him through the castle grounds until they reach an open stretch of farmland. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of fluffy sheep grazing contentedly alongside powerful horses in the distance. The green fields stretched endlessly, dotted with trees and bordered by a glistening river. Clark watched her with a smile, explaining that he had created this space specifically for her. He knows how much she loves nature and wants her to feel at home even if she is away from the countryside. He mentioned that she could fish in the river or tend to the animals as much as she liked. Her initial reaction was one of pure joy, but as she turned to thank him, her demeanor became shy, unsure as she had seemed too enthusiastic. Clark notices her hesitation and reassures her. He promises her that she can continue doing the things she loves even after they are married. He reveals that he had even convinced the king to end her princess lessons by declaring that he would refuse to produce any heirs unless Letitia's happiness came first. Then, with an earnest expression, Clark drops to one knee and asks her to marry him. Letitia stares at him, her face flattens, and she gives him a firm refusal. The rejection left Clark momentarily stunned. He tries again, his voice filled with sincerity, assuring her that he could provide her with a happy and fulfilling life. Yet Letitia's answer remains unchanged. Perplexed, Clark stands and asks her why she is so opposed to the idea, so she tells him that she doesn't want to marry royalty. Clark tells Letitia that there is little he can do about her dislike of royalty, as it is something he cannot change. Despite her continued refusals, he remains calm and escorts her back into the castle. He leads her to a lavish room, instructing her to behave until the ceremony, and closes the door with a carefree smile. As the realization sinks in, Letitia feels a wave of shock. Clark has completely disregarded her rejection of his proposal and is now intent on forcing her into marriage. Desperation takes hold, and she frantically searches the room for an escape route. Unfortunately, her efforts prove futile, leaving her feeling trapped and overwhelmed. Exhausted, Letitia collapses onto the couch. Eventually, she drifts off into a restless sleep. In her dreams, she is back in Alberta, standing by the familiar river as she reels in what she believes to be a large fish. To her horror, it is not a fish but Clark, smiling happily as he reaches out to embrace her. Startled, she runs toward the town center, only to find it eerily empty of her usual friends and neighbors. Instead, dozens of Clark clones surround her, each one vying for her attention. She stumbles backward toward the pond, only for a version of Clark with fish-like features to emerge from the water and ask her to marry him. The unsettling sight jolts her awake. Disoriented, Letitia finds herself lying in an unfamiliar bed. A maid stands nearby, offering her a warm breakfast. Letitia's initial skepticism is soon replaced by hunger, and she reluctantly accepts the meal. The breakfast is simple but delicious: scrambled eggs and freshly baked croissants. For a brief moment, Letitia feels a sense of calm, savoring the peace after a chaotic day. The maid further pampers her, preparing a warm bath, combing her hair, and presenting her with a selection of comfortable gowns. Letitia begins to relax, lulled into a false sense of security by the maid's kindness. However, as the maid bows and prepares to leave, Letitia seizes her opportunity. Pushing past her, Letitia apologizes quickly, explaining that her freedom means more to her than anything else. Despite the gown's simplicity, running in it proves challenging. She gathers part of the fabric in her hands and rushes down the halls, evading the sounds of approaching staff alerted by the maid's alarm bell. Spotting an open window, she climbs out as quietly as possible, landing awkwardly on the ground below. As she struggles to get her bearings, a familiar voice speaks beside her. Looking up, Letitia finds Clark standing next to her, his hand extended in an offer of help. She hesitates, unsure of what to do, but eventually places her hand in his. Clark pulls her up with ease. However, instead of pulling her to her feet, Clark lifts Letitia back over his shoulder with ease. Flashing his usual easy smile, he tells her that her escape attempt is futile and carries her back to the room she was initially confined to. Once alone, Letitia reassesses her situation, imagining an audience as she recounts the luxurious breakfast and soothing bath she enjoyed earlier. Her thoughts are interrupted when the same maid from the morning, Maria, offers her some tea. Letitia takes a tentative sip, pleased by the tea's rich flavor. She apologizes to Maria for pushing her earlier and asks if she's hurt. Maria reassures her that she's perfectly fine, even jumping lightly to prove she has no injuries. As Letitia observes Maria more closely, she notices their similar height, build, and age. An idea begins to form in her mind, prompting Maria to grow uneasy. When Maria asks if Letitia is planning something mischievous, Letitia cheerfully suggests switching clothes, claiming she just wants to try on the maid's uniform. Realizing Letitia's true intention is to use her as a decoy, Maria attempts to put distance between them. She scolds Letitia for her constant escape attempts, but Letitia, maintaining a playful demeanor, corners her and insists she submit willingly. As Letitia attempts to remove Maria's uniform, Maria frantically rings a bell. Moments later, Clark bursts into the room, shocked by the scene before him. Maria quickly explains that Letitia was trying to make her into a decoy. Clark sighs, exasperated yet amused by his fiancée's relentless antics. Dismissing Maria, he decides to take this opportunity to have a heartfelt conversation with Letitia. He leads her to the tea table, grasping her hands as he prepares to explain his feelings. Letitia, already dreading the conversation, tries to pull her hands away, but to no avail. Hours pass as Clark pours his heart out, detailing his love for Letitia and showering her with compliments. By the time he dismisses her, the sun has set. Overwhelmed and exhausted, Letitia collapses onto her bed, her cheeks burning as she replays Clark's earnest words in her mind. Maria returns to check on her for the evening, remarking that Letitia should consider herself lucky to have someone who loves her so deeply. Feeling mildly insulted, Letitia argues that she's being forced into the marriage. Maria counters that Clark has done everything possible to win her affection, but Letitia has been too preoccupied with running away to notice. As Maria bids her goodnight, Letitia asks her to drop the formalities, reminding her that she's not married to Clark yet. Maria remains firm, insisting on addressing her as Mistress Letitia, as the wedding is inevitable. Left alone, Letitia gazes out at the full moon, marveling at its beauty, unaware that Clark is doing the same in his study. Suddenly, her resolve hardens. She throws a table at the massive window to shatter it, ties her bedsheets into a makeshift rope, and climbs down. Her feet touch the ground, and she runs toward the gate, convinced she's finally free. But just as she nears escape, a hand firmly grasps hers, stopping her in her tracks. Clark pulls her close and asks her what type of necklace she would prefer for their wedding day. After Letitia's failed attempt to escape the palace by climbing out her window, Clark had her placed in a more secure room. Maria explained the room's purpose with calm detachment, noting that it was often used to discipline nobles who defied palace rules. She reassured Letitia that while it was confining, no noble had ever lost their life within its walls. Brianna is also present, happily eating the snacks placed on the table as she chats with Letitia. She informs her newfound friend that she has been hired to act as her conversation partner, a role meant to keep Letitia occupied from planning further escapes. Letitia feels a deep sense of betrayal, knowing Brianna is participating in keeping her confined. Brianna, however, was unapologetic, casually explaining that money was the most important thing in the world. Brianna also reveals another reason for her visit. She proudly holds up a recently released romance novel. The book quickly became a bestseller across the kingdom. Letitia's disbelief grew as Brianna began summarizing its plot. The novel, as it turns out, was a fictionalized and highly romanticized retelling of Letitia's life. The story painted Letitia as a brave and resilient heroine who endured rigorous princess lessons to be with her one true love, Prince Clark. When Letitia questioned how such a story could exist, Brianna admitted her involvement. She explains that to sway public opinion, she had shared stories of Letitia's struggles with people. The result was a kingdom enamored with the idea of their future queen, a young woman who had supposedly faced immense adversity to be with a prince. Public enthusiasm for the royal wedding was at an all-time high, and Letitia's personal desires had been drowned out by the collective joy of the people. Brianna, proud of her efforts, celebrated with more biscuits, cheerfully noting that everyone in the kingdom was rooting for Letitia and Clark's marriage. Letitia, however, trembled with frustration, muttering that all she wanted was her freedom. Brianna, though sympathetic, pointed out the futility of resistance. She states that Clark will never give up on her, no matter how many times she will try to escape. She also questioned Letitia's aversion to the marriage, emphasizing that Clark was a good man who could provide her with a life free of hardship. As Brianna sipped her tea, she winced, having burned her tongue. She apologized briefly and glanced at Letitia, who sat gracefully, effortlessly sipping her tea with perfect poise. Brianna couldn't help but admire her composure. Letitia, however, stared lifelessly at her tea, reflecting on the years of princess training that had instilled such habits in her. Brianna admits that princess lessons are brutally difficult, recalling how she couldn't endure them herself when she briefly tried during Letitia's absence. Even Catherine and Isabella, who grew up in the palace nursery from their toddler years, constantly complained about the grueling nature of the training. Suddenly, Letitia rises from her seat and moves toward the window. Brianna tenses, convinced her friend is planning yet another escape. Instead, Letitia stops at the window and stares longingly at the world outside. She repeats that she wants her freedom and her choices. She laments how even the most basic decision, like choosing her husband, was taken from her. She confesses that she doesn't understand why becoming Prince Clark's fiancé was so important in the first place. Above all, she wishes she had the freedom to love someone of her own choosing. Brianna, slightly exasperated, breaks the silence, questioning Letitia if she even knows what it means to be in love. She reminds Letitia that choosing love and living on one's own terms is a luxury few can afford. The unexpected coldness of Brianna's response stuns Letitia. She turns away from the window and returns to her seat, silent but clearly unsettled by the remark. One day, Letitia lounges on her sofa, bored and frustrated with her confinement. Suddenly, her older brother, Nader, appears in front of her, lightly scolding her for being so unladylike in her posture. He presses a letter onto her face, breaking her reverie. Letitia's mood shifts immediately when she realizes it's from their mother. Nader then places a small green gift box on the table. Their mother, he explains, has been expressing her excitement about the day Letitia will become a proper queen. Letitia ignores the comment and bombards Nader with questions about their village, eager for news of Lily and the others. Nader reassures her that everyone is well. The village remains peaceful, and their father has even been considering adding another horse to the family stables. Letitia sighs wistfully, voicing her longing to return to the villa. Nader quickly shuts her down, insisting it's impossible for her to leave the castle. She tries to bargain, asking at least to be moved back to her previous room with its spacious interior and large windows. Once again, Nader refuses. Defeated, Letitia shifts her attention, finally noticing the green box on the table. She asks what might be inside, and Nader gestures for her to guess. She inspects it carefully and even sniffs it. She breaks into a wide grin, realizing it's filled with their mother's special muffins. Her excitement is palpable as she prepares to take a bite at home. But Nader interrupts her, admitting mischievously that he helped make one of the muffins, meaning one of them will taste absolutely dreadful. The siblings then agree to play a game in which they dub Deaf Muffin Roulette. The rules are simple. They play rock, paper, scissors to decide who picks a muffin first, and whoever eats the bad one loses. Letitia wins the first round, confidently sniffing the muffins to avoid the disastrous one. Nader laughs at Letitia's exaggerated expressions as she sniffs the muffins, clearly amused by how unladylike she appears. Letitia finally selects a muffin and steps aside, allowing her brother to approach the box. Confidently, Nader claims he knows exactly which one their mother made and picks what he believes to be the perfect muffin. Standing face to face, they each take a bite of their chosen muffins to test their luck. Letitia grins as the familiar, sweet, and fluffy flavor melts in her mouth. Nader also nods in approval, declaring his muffin to be equally delicious. Realizing neither of them picked the deaf muffin, they decide to up the stakes, abandoning the orderly game of rock, paper, scissors, and squatting at each other's hands to snatch the next muffin from the box. Their competitive antics escalate, but once again they both end up with good muffins. With only 2 muffins remaining in the box, Letitia hesitates. She stares at the final options, trying to determine which one might be safe, but neither looks or smells any different. Growing impatient with her indecisiveness, Nader rolls his eyes and lectures her about how her inability to make quick decisions often leads to trouble. Letitia pointedly ignores his critique, still fixated on the muffins. Sighing in exasperation, Nader reaches over her and picks one of the muffins himself. He remarks that nothing will happen if Letitia doesn't act, leaving Letitia with no choice but to take the remaining muffin. They both bite into their muffins at the same time, only to be assaulted by an overwhelming wave of spiciness. Gasping and fanning their mouths, they realize their mother had tricked them. Both muffins were spiked with a fiery surprise. Nader chuckles, declaring their mother the true winner of the game. Despite the lingering heat in her mouth, Letitia manages to laugh, and Nader observes that she seems more like her usual self. He points this out with a smile, relieved to see her in better spirits. Letitia calls out to Maria, asking for refreshments to help them recover from the spice. Later that evening, Maria bids Letitia goodnight, leaving her alone in her room. Letitia feels a wave of relief. Finally, she has some peace to focus on her next escape plan. She begins inspecting her small room for a possible way out other than the heavily guarded door. As she moves around, her foot presses down a creaky floorboard. Curious, she kneels down and discovers what appears to be a hidden compartment. Excitement bubbles in her chest as she lifts the cover, only to find that it's a shallow storage space, far too small to serve as an escape route. Letitia moves to the ornate bookshelf in her small room, her eyes scanning for any signs of a hidden door. As she inspects the shelves, she notices that most of the books are historical texts, but one stands out: Prince Clark's diary. Hesitation grips her. Reading it could get her in trouble. Yet her curiosity overrides her caution, and she reaches for it. As soon as she pulls the diary from the shelf, a strange mechanism whirs to life. The bookshelf slides to the side, revealing a secret passage. Letitia's heart races at the prospect of freedom. To be safe, she throws the diary into the passage to test for traps. When nothing happens, she steps in, hoping the passage leads outside. Before she can take another step, the familiar voice greets her with a good evening. Light floods the passage, and Clark sits casually in a chair, smiling. He comments on her disregard for his diary, amused by how she threw it without care. Clark explains that he had expected her to discover the secret room during one of her escape attempts. He moved his quarters there temporarily to wait for her. Despite her unceremonious treatment of his diary, he admits he's pleased she was curious enough to try to read it, since the diary is the key to opening the hidden room. Letitia stiffens, nervous about being caught. She tries to retreat to her room, but Clark pulls a curtain, activating the mechanism to close the bookshelf. The passage seals, trapping her inside with him. As she attempts to flee, Clark catches her hand and pulls her close, cradling her in his arms. When she meets his gaze, he calls her cute, and her cheeks flush red as she realizes the intimate position they're in. Her eyes dart to the nearby bed, and she thrashes in his arms, demanding to be let go. Clark releases her, and she seizes the moment to shove him away, and he stumbles back, landing on the bed. Realizing why Letitia became so agitated, Clark reassures her that he has no intention of touching her inappropriately before their wedding. However, he approaches her again, leaning in close. Letitia braces for a kiss, only for Clark to hug her instead. He tells her that physical affection is important in building a strong relationship. The next morning, determined to avoid a repeat of the previous night, Letitia enlists Maria to help move a heavy piece of furniture at the side of the bookshelf. Maria, curious, asks why they're moving it. Letitia explains what happened and declares she wants to keep Clark out of her room. Maria gushes over how romantic the secret room sounds, but Letitia remains unimpressed. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of the bookshelf mechanism struggling to move. The furniture blocks the passage from opening fully. Letitia laughs, imagining Clark's frustration, only for him to enter her room through the main door. He notices the furniture and orders Maria to put it back. Before leaving, he promises Letitia he'll see her that evening. Frustrated, Letitia vents to Nader, who dismisses her complaints, reminding her that Clark is her fiancé. Letitia insists she's uncomfortable with physical affection and inexperience in such matters. Nader advises her to be honest with Clark, but to explain herself clearly so he understands her perspective. That evening, when Clark moves to embrace her, Letitia firmly tells him not to touch her immoderately. She adds a penalty that if he oversteps his bounds, she'll stop calling him by his name. The thought of never hearing her say his name visibly distresses Clark, and he reluctantly agrees to her terms, retreating for the night. The next morning, Letitia recounts the encounter to Brianna, who feels sorry for the prince. Brianna points out that Clark's affection shows he genuinely cares for Letitia and tries to win her attention. Their discussion is interrupted by Maria, who brings Clark's visitation schedule. Letitia realizes to her horror that Clark plans to visit her daily. She sighs, realizing she forgot to set limits on his visits. The Grand Palace was alive with music and laughter as nobles chatted across the polished floors. Letitia, finally granted freedom from her room, steps cautiously into the ballroom, happy as she takes in the lively scene before her. She scans the crowd, her gaze instinctively landing on Clark. As she moves toward him, her steps falter upon noticing her fiancé is chatting with another woman. They lean slightly toward each other, their expressions warm and familiar. A sudden, unfamiliar tightness gripped Letitia's chest, and before she could rationalize it, she turned away, pushing through the guests with hurried steps. The cool night air embraced her as she reached the balcony to vent. The sight of Clark with another woman unsettled her, though she refused to acknowledge why. After voicing her frustrations to the wind, raindrops began to fall. The sudden sensation of rough fabric engulfing her vision sent a jolt of panic through her. After some time, Clark gets notified that Letitia has been abducted and that people have noticed the carriage that took her has the crest of the Delbaran family and is heading to the forest near the borders. Clark instructs his man not to alert his guests so no one will panic, but asks Nader to join him in chasing the carriage. Meanwhile, the carriage stops somewhere in the forest for a short break. Letitia wakes up a little due to the change of movement and notices the feet and legs of the man who kidnapped her suddenly enter the carriage to take shelter from the rain. However, she notices another pair of legs and hears the voice of a young man complaining about the other man's wet state. Letitia tries to move her arms but realizes that they have been tied up and there is also a cloth around her mouth preventing her from talking. The two figures suddenly notice her movements and decide to remove the bag covering her face. Disappointment flickered across a young boy's facial features, his irritation growing as he assessed her. He scolds his servant for picking the wrong girl, pointing out that Letitia isn't Maria. He orders his servant to throw her out, which causes Letitia to struggle. She manages to loosen the fabric and demands to be brought back to the castle, otherwise a huge problem may occur. She introduces herself as the fiancée of Prince Clark, meaning the entire kingdom may go on a search for her once they realize she is missing. The servant and his master deliberated on whether they should just throw her out like they intended because returning her may cause more problems. Realizing that they are serious about throwing her out, Letitia remembers them talking about a girl named Maria and starts to claim that she knows her, hoping that the Maria they are looking for is the same person as her maid. She promises to share everything she knows about Maria if they untie her restraints. Eventually, Letitia's restraints are undone and she finds herself listening to the young boy's affection towards Maria. Without hesitation or shame, he declares his love for her, convinced that fate has destined them to be together. The servant, who she learned is named Lyle, was kind enough to introduce the boy as Prince Louis of Delbaran. Maria, as it turns out, was once a noblewoman and shared a sibling-like bond with Louis. However, Louis insists their relationship was that of lovers. Maria's noble house collapsed, forcing her to disappear from Delbaran entirely. No one knew what happened to her until someone discovered her working as a maid and asked her, confirming Letitia's suspicion that her maid was the Maria they were searching for. Lyle admits that he opposed Louis' reckless kidnapping plan. However, Louis refused to listen, believing it was the only way to bring Maria back to Delbaran. They soon arrive at an inn, their initial tension easing as they share ideas on how to get out of trouble. Letitia proposes that they give her enough money to buy a house near the border so she can live as a commoner. Lyle suggests fabricating a story about finding Letitia and returning her to the castle. Meanwhile, Louis just wants to get Maria. Each plan threatens to create even more problems between their kingdoms. They debate until dinner arrives, momentarily distracting them. As the meal is served, Louis eyes the food warily, clearly unaccustomed to anything outside the lavish meals of his palace. Letitia and Lyle chat animatedly about the dishes, but Louis hesitates before taking a nervous bite. Suddenly, he recoils in horror, discovering a fishbone in his food. Lyle sighs and assures him that common folks simply remove the bones before eating and offers to remove the bones for him. Letitia, meanwhile, wonders why they are wasting time in an inn instead of moving forward. She is shocked to learn that Louis insisted on stopping just so he could take a bath before retiring for the night. He shows no concern over possible pursuers, confident they will reach his kingdom in the morning and resolve everything through diplomatic discussions. Later in the evening, a new problem arises. Louis flatly refuses to share a room with Lyle, claiming he deserves better accommodations. Letitia argues that she also cannot share a room with a man as it would be improper. Their disagreement escalates until Louis offhandedly remarks that Letitia lacks any sex appeal, dismissing her concerns entirely. The two nobles, unwilling to prolong their argument, decide that the best solution is to have Lyle remain outside to stand watch while they retreat to separate rooms. Lyle, left standing alone in the hallway, looks bewildered as their doors shut behind them. Finally, alone, Letitia resolves that now is the best time to escape. If she sells her dress and accessories, she feels confident that she can survive on her own for a while, long enough to find work and settle into life as a commoner. The idea of shedding her noble duties fills her with excitement. Determined, she strides over to the window and pushes it open, inhaling the crisp night air. Freedom feels so close. She grips the windowsill, preparing to make her escape, when a commotion outside her door halts her movements. Her heart pounds as she slowly turns around, only to find Clark standing in the doorway. His expression is unreadable. Clark steps forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, and remarks on her choice of company for the evening. Lyle, desperate to explain, quickly interjects, claiming he has only found Letitia and intends to return her to the castle. However, his words betray Letitia's plan, and she immediately turns on him, frustration bubbling over as she scolds him for exposing her escape attempt. Clark, however, is more focused on something else entirely. His gaze lingers on Letitia and Lyle's apparent familiarity, and his jealousy flares. Without giving Letitia a chance to continue arguing, he silences her, stating that any explanations can wait until they return to the palace. Before the tension in the room can settle, Louis suddenly appears, dripping wet and wearing only a towel. Without hesitation, he orders Lyle to call someone to fix his bath, complaining about its inadequacies. As he finally takes notice of Clark's presence, Louis straightens up and offers a practiced bow. With an air of confidence, he introduces himself as the Prince of Delbaran and boldly claims that he and Lyle have been the ones to rescue Letitia. The room erupts into chaos as arguments break out, their voices growing loud enough to disturb the other guests. Their heated exchange continues until Nader nears their room. Hearing the commotion, he assures the restless inn guests that he will handle the situation. Once they retreat to their rooms, he steps inside, his gaze landing on the people arguing with clear disapproval. Taking a deep breath, Nader raises his voice, cutting through the noise with a commanding tone. The sudden authority in his voice stuns everyone into silence, their childish bickering coming to an abrupt halt. Once order is restored, Nader takes charge of the discussion, recognizing that they need to form a convincing story to prevent conflict between their kingdoms. After a moment of contemplation, he suggests they report that Louis sought to strengthen ties between Delbaran and Aster. To do so, he decided to befriend Letitia, hoping she would put in a good word for him with Clark. As part of this effort, he invited her on a carriage ride, resulting in the current situation. Letitia immediately protests, but to her frustration, everyone else agrees that this fabricated story is the best course of action. With the matter settled, Nader instructs Louis to return to his room and properly dress himself, leaving Letitia and Clark alone together. The tension lingers between them, thick and unspoken. Clark, unable to contain his jealousy any longer, finally voices his frustration, demanding to know how Letitia had become so familiar with another man in such a short time. Letitia recognizes the depth of his anger, even beneath his ever-present smile. Guilt washes over her, and she scrambles to explain herself, her words tumbling out in a rush as she attempts to apologize. Before she can say much, Clark silences her by pulling her into a sudden embrace. The warmth of his arms and the firm beat of his heart momentarily steal Letitia's breath away. But as quickly as the hug begins, it ends. Clark releases her and suggests they start heading back to the castle. Letitia looks up at him, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Then, without warning, she bolts. The cool night air rushes against her skin as she races out of the inn, her heart pounding with exhilaration as she believes she managed to get away. Just as she reaches the outskirts of the inn, a firm arm stops her in her tracks, causing her to fall back down in the sand. Nader stands before her, an exasperated expression on his face. With a resigned sigh, he instructs her to return to the castle as running is futile since the town is heavily guarded. He vows that nothing will stand in the way of her marriage to Clark. He doesn't understand why she resists, since Clark truly loves her and wants what's best for her. Nader pats her head in a rare display of affection. He assures her that Clark will make her happy, but it's up to her to face him properly and accept it. By morning, Letitia finds herself back at the castle, where Maria greets her with open arms, thrilled at her return. However, their reunion is short-lived. Louis, who had accompanied them back, interrupts the moment with his usual dramatic flair. Maria stiffens in shock at the sight of him. With a beaming smile, Louis proudly declares that he will be staying in the kingdom as an exchange student. His true intention, however, is to be near Maria as much as possible while supposedly strengthening the bonds between their kingdoms. His enthusiasm is boundless, but Maria's reaction is the complete opposite. Her face falls as dread settles in. The last thing she wants is to deal with Louis' troublesome antics day in and day out. Letitia watches them with amusement, smiling fondly. Beside her, Nader admits that he played a role in allowing Louis to stay. He hopes that Letitia, surrounded by friends, won't despise castle life as much as she claims to, making her want to stay and stop her escape attempts. Before Letitia can respond, Maria suddenly darts behind her, seeking protection. She clutches Letitia's sleeve, pleading for help. Nader smiles at the situation and steps in to redirect Louis' energy. He offers to lead the young prince to his new room, promising that he can spend time with Maria later. Reluctantly, Louis agrees, though he makes it clear that he intends to see Maria as soon as possible. As the commotion dies down, Letitia finally realizes that Clark is nowhere to be seen. Her brow furrows in concern, and she wonders where he has gone. Meanwhile, across the castle, Brianna walks leisurely toward Letitia's chambers. As she passes a window overlooking the garden, something unusual catches her eye. Curious, she pauses and peers outside for a better look. There she sees Clark, who is conversing animatedly with a woman she doesn't recognize. The sight of them together sends a pang through Brianna's chest. She vows not to let anyone know that Clark is cheating, wanting to protect the peace the palace is experiencing now with Letitia finally back. One morning, Letitia receives a visit from someone she half-jokingly describes as a witch, her future mother-in-law, Queen Laura. The queen possesses an air of eternal youth, her regal presence both intimidating and mesmerizing. Accompanying her is her youngest son, Prince Matthias, a child Letitia can't help but admire. As soon as Matthias lays eyes on Letitia, with a joyful cry of her nickname, he runs straight to her, arms outstretched, eager to be pampered. Letitia melts instantly. Enchanted by the toddler's charm, she scoops him up without hesitation, showering him with affection. She cradles him close, playfully cooing at him, and even goes so far as to tell Queen Laura that she wishes Matthias were her own child. The moment remains heartwarmingly sweet until Matthias attempts to plant an innocent kiss on her cheek. Before he can succeed, Clark plucks Matthias out of Letitia's arms and places him on another seat. Clark promptly takes the now empty seat beside Letitia, leaning in with a smile of his own. He demands the same treatment Matthias received, expecting her attention all to himself. Days later, Brianna and Louis visit Letitia in her room. Brianna wastes no time diving into the topic on her mind, casually asking Letitia if she has ever thought about what her future children with Clark might look like. Letitia chokes on her tea. Horror flashes across her face as the reality of having children with the prince suddenly crashes down on her. She informs Letitia that it's inevitable. Clark has already made it clear that he has no interest in producing heirs unless it's with her. Letitia, unwilling to acknowledge this fact, quickly dismisses the idea, stubbornly insisting that she will find a way to stop the wedding and reclaim her freedom. Lyle and Louis exchange notice that despite Letitia's loud protests about her engagement to Clark, it's becoming increasingly obvious that she isn't resisting it as much as she claims. As the discussion about Letitia's blatant denial continues, Brianna suddenly falls silent. A twinge of guilt flickers across her face as she thinks about what she witnessed a few days ago in the garden. Louis, oblivious to the shift in mood, changes the subject, announcing that he'd rather be spending time with Maria. Before he can act on his words, Letitia intervenes, blocking his path in an attempt to curb his relentless advances. Louis remains undeterred, seemingly immune to the very obvious hints that Maria has no interest in him whatsoever. Letitia, growing frustrated, turns to Brianna for backup, only to find her distracted. Letitia immediately senses something is wrong. She decides to confront Brianna, demanding to know what's on her mind. After a pause, Brianna finally confesses. She reveals that she recently saw Clark sharing what appeared to be an intimate moment with a tall, beautiful woman. The description sparks something in Letitia's memory. Her mind flashes back to the night of the ball when she caught a glimpse of Clark with a similar woman. Maria, sensing the rising tension, attempts to dismiss the notion as a misunderstanding. But Letitia shakes her head, confirming that she did, in fact, see a strikingly beautiful woman by Clark's side that night. A sudden wave of frustration surges through Letitia. She scowls, grumbling about how unfair it is that Clark can freely enjoy himself while she remains confined to her room, drowning in boredom. The realization dawns on her since the Queen's visit 4 days ago, Clark has not once come to see her. Her frustration hardens into suspicion. If Clark has been avoiding her, then there must be a reason. She concludes that Clark must have been having an affair. Letitia's expression darkens as she makes up her mind. Without hesitation, she announces that she's going to punch Clark. Her sudden declaration stuns everyone in the room. Maria gasps, eyes widening in alarm. Before Letitia can storm out, she rushes forward, desperately attempting to hold her back. Since no one allows her to leave the room, Letitia orders Maria and Brianna to uncover the truth about Clark's supposed affair. Brianna immediately refuses, not wanting to get involved in something that could get her into trouble. However, Letitia slyly offers to pay her more than Clark does, and that instantly changes Brianna's mind. Lyle and Louis also volunteer to help, seeing this as a golden opportunity to prove that Louis is the better man. Maria, however, hesitates. She is, after all, Clark's employee, and she sincerely believes in the prince's devotion to Letitia. Lyle states that for men, having multiple women is often seen as a sign of status and value. His words make Brianna bristle with disgust. She firmly counters, arguing that any man who betrays the one he claims to love is worth nothing at all. With renewed determination, Brianna takes the lead in investigating the truth. She discreetly questions the women who reside in the castle. They have all noticed a tall, slender woman frequently lingering around Prince Clark, and the two seem suspiciously close. Meanwhile, Lyle and Louis gather intel from the palace guards. Several of them mention a mysteriously beautiful woman who has been seen entering Clark's chambers multiple times. Maria approaches the maids for answers. They too have seen the woman and believe she is attempting to win Clark over. One of them even claims to have witnessed the two hugging on the balcony, which makes Maria's stomach churn with unease. Back in Letitia's room, frustration boils within her. Her irritation only intensifies when she notices the increased number of guards stationed outside her window, making escape impossible. In a fit of anger, she kicks the wall, only to immediately regret it as pain shoots up her foot. Nursing her injury, she scowls, convinced that Clark is betraying her. Maria, still conflicted, hesitates to report her findings. She recalls the day she was first hired by Clark, the kindness he showed her, the way he made her feel valued in the kingdom. She remembers the moment he entrusted Letitia's care to her, placing deep faith in her abilities. Her gaze drifts toward the small bell Clark had given her back then, a symbol of trust and duty. After a long moment, she steps back into Letitia's room. Before she can say anything, Letitia beams and pulls her into a tight hug, relieved to have one of her friends back. Feeling guilt gnawing at her, Maria finally speaks. She reminds Letitia that she is employed by Prince Clark and as such, she will stand by his love for her. Choosing to believe in his loyalty, she smiles reassuringly and tells Letitia that she only wants her to marry happily because ultimately that is part of her duty. Deciding to help Letitia uncover the truth for herself, the group devises a plan to get her out of the castle unnoticed. While Lyle and Lewis distract the guards, Brianna and Maria sneak Letitia out of the gate to follow Clark. Maria stays behind to cover for Letitia if needed, ensuring no one realizes she is gone. As they arrive at the shopping district, Brianna is surprised that Letitia isn't distracted by the many vibrant sights around her, considering she hasn't been allowed outside the castle for a long time. However, Letitia remains focused on her goal, determined to discover the truth. Brianna suddenly spots Clark standing outside his shop with the mysterious woman. She and Letitia carefully maneuver closer, attempting to eavesdrop on their conversation. Realizing that their hiding options are limited, they settle behind a street lamp, peeking around it to observe their interactions. Brianna, analyzing their body language, begins to suspect that their relationship might not be as intimate as she initially feared. A respectful distance remains between them, and Clark doesn't display the kind of affection one would expect from a man with a secret lover. However, Letitia notices something troubling. Clark's smile appears more genuine with this woman than it ever does of anyone else. Before they can gather more information, Clark and the woman begin moving again. Letitia and Brianna quickly trail behind them, keeping their distance. Their pursuit leads them to the entrance of a gentleman's club. Brianna is taken aback since it is odd for Clark to take a lover into the building. Determined to confront Clark now, Brianna takes matters into her own hands. She drags Letitia forward into the building and quickly ducks behind a small coach, forcing Letitia to face her fiancé alone. Clark, clearly shocked to see Letitia outside the castle grounds, immediately demands she return at once. But Letitia stands her ground, accusing him of being unfair. While he is to roam freely and enjoy himself with another woman, she is confined to her room with no explanation. Before Clark can respond, the mysterious woman finally speaks, her voice smoother and deeper than expected. Letitia's eyes widen as she realizes the truth. This woman is actually a man. The man introduces himself as Viscount Neil of Delbaran. Recovering from her shock, Letitia quickly regains her composure and offers a polite apology for the misunderstanding. Neil, however, reassures her with a chuckle, explaining that he is well aware of his own beauty, especially when he chooses to wear fine dresses. Striking a dramatic pose, he playfully shows off his most flattering angles. From her hiding place, Brianna watches in disbelief, stunned by his unabashed narcissism. Seeing Letitia already outside the palace, Neil takes the opportunity to encourage Clark to spend the rest of the day with her. He then turns toward Brianna, easily spotting her from her hiding place, and invites her to leave with him, leaving Letitia and Clark alone. Letitia hastily apologizes for jumping to conclusions, but Clark surprises her by simply forgiving her without any sign of anger. Instead, he extends an invitation for a secret date, just as Neil had suggested. With the misunderstanding resolved, they spend the rest of the day exploring the town together. Clark, experiencing the simple joys of common life, even tries bartering for the first time. With unexpected success, he manages to purchase a sweet drink he has never tried before, grinning as he enjoys flavors he has never tried before. Clark hands Letitia the drink, watching as she takes a sip. The moment she uses the same straw as him, realization dawns on his face. He is pleasantly surprised, considering it an indirect kiss. Letitia's face flushes with embarrassment as she quickly returns the drink, scolding him for making such an expression. As they continue their date, they take a break at a nearby park, watching people pass by. Clark gazes at the lively scenery and reflects on his desire to protect his kingdom's current peace and happiness. Letitia, taken aback by his words, finds herself surprised by his selfless dream. Clark then reaches into some of their bags and places a small box in Letitia's hands. When she opens it, a soft melody plays, revealing a tiny rabbit-like creature twirling inside the music box. He explains that the animal called Milo is native to Delbaran and is known for its unwavering loyalty to its partner. He chooses this as a symbol of his commitment to her. Letitia, captivated by the delicate craftsmanship, watches the tiny figure spin, enchanted by its charm. Observing her fascination, Clark notes how the Milo reminds him of her. The creature's small and adorable appearance conceals the clear determination in its eyes, just like Letitia. Her lips curl into a genuine smile as she admires the gift, and Clark finally feels relieved knowing he has done something to make her happy. A lingering sense of guilt creeps into Letitia's heart. She acknowledges her own inexperience when it comes to love and affection, admitting to him that it may take time for her to reciprocate Clark's feelings. The thought of running away still lingers in her mind, the desire for freedom tugging at her heart. Yet, Clark remains undeterred. He reassures her that he will always find a way to bring her back to him. As the sun begins to set, Clark extends his hand toward Letitia, inviting her to walk back with him. Without hesitation, she takes it, allowing him to pull her up. Hidden behind the bushes, Neil, Brianna, Lyle, and Louis observe the couple from a distance. Their watchful eyes follow every interaction, hoping the time spent together has strengthened the bond between Letitia and Clark. Neil takes pride in having sparked Letitia's jealousy, boosting his own confidence in his charm, much to the group's annoyance. Late one evening, Louis and Lyle sneak around the palace with the intention of delivering a box of macarons to Maria. Louis, believing the thoughtful gift from her favorite shop will win in her favor, hopes it will also grant him permission to spend the evening with her. Lyle, however, is more concerned about the risk of getting caught sneaking around at such a late hour. As they advance through the dimly lit halls, Louis suddenly freezes at the eerie sight of the long, dark corridor stretching before them. Trying to mask his unease, he distracts himself by instructing Lyle to check if the macarons remain intact. Lyle, though reluctant, does as asked but tries to convince Louis that they should abandon their mission and enjoy the treats themselves instead. Just as he lifts his gaze to continue persuading his master, his expression shifts to one of terror. Unable to form words, he raises a shaking hand and points towards something in the darkness. Louis turns to see what has unsettled his servant and is immediately met with the ghastly figure of what appears to be a ghost. Panic grips them both and they scramble to escape, but their frantic movements cause them to stumble and fall. As they struggle to rise, the ghostly figure moves closer, begging for some of their macarons. Somehow, Lyle manages to flee and finds his way to Letitia's room, where Clark, Nader, Maria, Brianna, and Letitia listen intently to his breathless account. The group quickly realizes that Louis has been kidnapped by what appears to be a ghost. Rather than fear, Letitia's eyes shine with excitement at the prospect of catching a ghost. Maria, on the other hand, is far less enthusiastic, finding the idea of chasing after a spirit to be utterly reckless. Letitia attempts to persuade Clark to let her participate in the search, but her brother immediately sees through her. She is far more interested in the ghost than in rescuing Louis. Regardless, the group sets out to the place where Louis was last seen. Lyle, still shaken, picks up the discarded container of macarons that had been scattered during their frightful encounter as Maria moves to comfort him. A sudden, strange sound startles Brianna. Nader quickly grasps her hand, steadying her, and instructs her to remain calm. Taking charge, Nader decides that he and Brianna will search the lower floors while Clark and Letitia explore the upper levels. Maria is tasked with bringing Lyle back to Letitia's room so he can rest. Letitia reassures Maria with a mischievous promise to show her the ghost once they capture it, though Maria does not seem amused. While searching the upper floor, Clark shares an old ghost story with Letitia, recounting a childhood legend about a Black Reaper that spirits away members of the royal family. He recalls being so terrified of the tale as a child that he once developed a fever lasting 3 days. Letitia, momentarily distracted from her excitement, begins to feel genuine concern for Louis and urges Clark to pick up the pace in their search. Meanwhile, Brianna and Nader cautiously enter an old room on the lower floor. As they inspect the shelves, Brianna suddenly catches sight of a face shifting in the dim light. The sight startles her so badly that she nearly drops her lamp, but Nader reacts swiftly, catching it just in time to prevent a fire. After recovering from her fall, Brianna urges Nader to check behind the shelves, insisting that she saw something move. Nader, though skeptical, complies, leaving Brianna momentarily alone in the darkness. As he goes behind one of the shelves, his expression suddenly hardens. Meanwhile, Letitia and Clark continue their search. Letitia peers out into the courtyard and catches sight of a shadowy figure. She quickly calls Clark over, but by the time he looks, the figure has already vanished. Though he does not see it himself, Clark trusts Letitia's instincts and suggests they proceed with caution. Back in the lower halls, Nader informs Brianna through a gap in the shelf that there is nothing behind the shelf. He suggests they move on, but Brianna, still frustrated, expresses her irritation over the entire situation. Nader, though slightly amused by her conviction, suddenly notices movement ahead. He signals for Brianna to stay quiet and remain where she is while he cautiously approaches a large, ornate chest. As he leans in to inspect it, without warning, a ghostly figure emerges, causing Nader to let out an uncharacteristic yell. Brianna, unable to see what is happening in the darkness, is startled when she suddenly notices Nader being lifted into the air, ensnared in web-like strands. Elsewhere, Neil awakens abruptly from a deep sleep, a strange sense of unease settling over him. Convinced that something is amiss, he hastily leaves his room. Brianna attempts to put as much distance from the room as possible, her breath quickening as she dashes through the dimly lit corridors. In her panic, she fails to notice a pressure plate beneath her foot. The moment she steps on it, the ceiling creaks ominously and an iron maiden drops down before her. The contraction springs open, and before she can escape, it snaps shut around her, trapping her inside. Maria and Neil manage to track down Letitia and Clark. Neil claims to have had a dream about Milo, the small rabbit-like creature, which instructed him to lead them beyond the spiral staircase. Despite their initial skepticism, they decide to follow his guidance. A loud thud echoes from behind them, causing them to momentarily freeze. However, After a brief discussion, they determined that it was likely just the wind and proceeded forward. Reaching a split in the stairwell, Neil suggests dividing into two groups to cover more ground. Clark and Letitia take the right path, while Neil and Maria head left. As they continue, Letitia realizes that even Clark is unfamiliar with this part of the castle, since it belongs to the servants' quarters, an area he rarely visits. Before they can investigate further, a sharp scream pierces the silence. Recognizing Maria's voice, Letitia and Clark abandon their current path, turning back in haste to find out what has happened to her. Luckily, they turn around since if they had moved forward further, they may have gotten trapped. Before Letitia and Clark arrive, Maria is already ensnared by ghostly white ribbon-like arms that drag her into an unknown cabinet. By the time Letitia reaches the scene, only one of Maria's boots remains, a silent clue to her disappearance. Before they can decide on their next move, a piercing scream from above sends a chill down their spines. Meanwhile, Neil also falls victim to the mysterious force. He gets pulled into a hidden passage, his signature cane slipping from his grasp and landing on the cold stone floor. By the time Letitia and Clark reach his last known location, there is no trace of him beyond the abandoned cane. Clark quickly picks up the cane while Letitia scans the dimly lit corridor. A faint draft brushes against her skin, hinting at a hidden passage nearby. She instructs Clark to stay still while she searches for a trigger to activate the secret door. However, before she can make any progress, Clark unknowingly steps on a pressure plate. The trap activates instantly. A powerful gust of wind sweeps through the corridor, knocking Clark off balance. Letitia rushes forward in an attempt to pull him back, but the force is too strong. Within seconds, Clark vanishes, falling through a hidden trapdoor. Determined not to lose him, Letitia frantically searches for a way to reactivate the trap. She repeatedly strikes the pressure plate with her fist, but to her frustration, it refuses to work a second time. Declaring that she has a natural talent for finding traps, she continues her search. Taking a closer look at the ornate walls, she notices a small switch embedded in the carvings. Upon turning it, a section of the wall silently slides open, revealing a dark passageway. Letitia steps inside cautiously and finds herself emerging onto a rooftop where a massive mechanical structure looms before her. Curious, she pushes a nearby lever. At first, the mechanism releases only a hissing cloud of steam, leading Letitia to believe it is broken. But before she can inspect it further, the ground beneath her suddenly collapses, sending her plummeting into darkness. She lands on a cushioned floor, momentarily stunned but still clutching Neil's cane. Determined, she calls out a challenge to the ghost, demanding that it return her friends and Clark. However, as lights flicker on, the ghosts reveal themselves to be none other than Brianna and Queen Laura, both wearing face masks as part of their skincare routine. They chuckle at Letitia's fierce determination, even complimenting her for being so protective, especially toward Clark. Clark himself makes his presence known, visibly pleased that Letitia had tried so hard to rescue him. Beside him, Maria stands safely, prompting Letitia to rush over and return her missing boot. Neil is found comically stretched out on a wall, while Nader lounges on a couch, suspended by strange strings. Seeing Letitia's blank stare, Brianna explains that Nader had been complaining about shoulder pain, but ever since getting caught in the trap, his tension has mysteriously disappeared. Letitia, still trying to make sense of everything, finally asks what kind of room they have stumbled into. Nader casually responds that this is the room where all the traps lead to. Queen Laura then proudly reveals that she repurposed it into a secret beauty spa. Suddenly, a peculiar singing voice echoes from behind a curtain. Letitia pulls it open to find Louis, covered head to toe in thick foam, gleefully singing about how this beauty treatment will make Maria fall in love with him. On the ground, Letitia feels frustration bubbling inside her. She had been on high alert, genuinely concerned for Louis, only for him to not even care about them. Clark suggests that they get rid of all the traps scattered throughout the palace, fearing that someone might genuinely get hurt in the future. The Queen agrees but makes Clark promise not to destroy her secret beauty spa. As Letitia recovers from her initial annoyance, she remembers the dark figure she had seen in the courtyard, so she voices her concerns to the group. A sudden crash echoes through the room. Someone lands forcefully on the cushioned floor, sending up a thick cloud of soot that momentarily shrouds everything in darkness. The group tenses, assuming that an actual ghost has now appeared to haunt them. A few moments later, as the soot settles, Lily emerges from the dust, inquiring to know why the group is making such a ruckus. Everyone stares in confusion as Lily calmly explains her predicament. She had visited the castle intending to check on Letitia, but upon arriving, she saw Clark standing next to her mistress through a window. Panic overtook her at the sight, and in her rush to reach Letitia, she had triggered one of the castle's many traps, resulting in her unexpected arrival here. Letitia rushes forward and pulls Lily into a warm embrace. Smiling, Lily announces that from this day forward, she will once again be responsible for Letitia's care. Letitia then turns toward her brother, who is still suspended in midair, and demands an explanation. Nader, however, pointedly refuses to answer, choosing to enjoy the treatment. The noise eventually stirs Lewis from his peaceful relaxation. He groggily lifts his head from the foam bath, irritated by the commotion. Scowling, he scolds everyone for being too loud. Ryan immediately takes offense, snapping at him for being utterly unconcerned about their predicament. Maria even joins in, berating Lewis for his selfishness. Queen Laura approaches Letitia and hands her a folded parchment. As Letitia unfolds it, her eyes widen at the sight of an entire map of the castle. Laura leans in with a knowing smile, revealing that she once used this very map to attempt her own escape from the palace. Letitia is momentarily stunned, realizing that she and the queen have far more in common than she ever imagined. A smile slowly spreads across her face, realizing that Laura isn't opposed to her desire for freedom. As the queen steps away, Clark asks what his mother had whispered to her. Letitia merely grins innocently, swiftly hiding the map behind her back. Meanwhile, in Letitia's room, Lyle sleeps soundly, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded elsewhere. In the dim light, a shadowy figure moves silently, helping itself to a Macaron right next to him. Clark had always been a stubborn child. Many mornings were spent avoiding his lessons, much to the frustration of the palace servants. Sebastian often tried to coax him back to his room for his tutoring sessions, but Clark had little interest in the rigid structure of court life. He preferred to wander the halls. One particular morning, during one of his usual attempts to evade responsibility, he found himself descending the grand staircase, his steps slowing as he heard soft, muffled sobs. The sound came from the entrance of the palace, where a small figure stood facing the massive doors. Letitia, still a child then, trembled as she cried into her hands. The sight stirred something unfamiliar in him, an emotion he couldn't quite place. He called out to her, but when she turned, her gaze was cold and distant. Without a word, she straightened, wiped her face, and walked away. He stood there, watching her disappear down the hall, unable to shake the feeling of guilt. Years later, the memory remained as vivid as ever. Awakening from the dream, Clark felt the weight of it settle on his chest, gnawing at his resolve. Convincing Letitia that she could be happy with him seemed impossible now, as if her indifference had been set in stone since childhood. Shaking off his thoughts, he has a fencing session with a visiting friend. The morning air is crisp as he faces Nathan in a match, their blades clashing with rhythmic precision. Neil and Nader watch from the sidelines as the duel stretches on, ending in a draw when both fighters press their swords to each other's throats. Nathan, uninterested in continuing, withdrew first, but Clark, unwilling to let the match end so easily, lunged at him again in playful persistence. Afterward, Clark finds himself lost in another childhood memory, the first time he had ever asked his parents for something. His thoughts are interrupted when Nathan mentions his new horse, describing its strength and agility with pride. He speaks of victories won thanks to its fast gallops and strong jumps. The excitement in his voice is evident as he invites Clark out for a ride soon, and Clark, always one to rise to the occasion, accepts without hesitation. Suddenly, Neil approaches them, admiring how the beauty of the greenhouse complements his own striking appearance. He also tells the two princes that he has found a hot spring. Clark recalled that it had once been in use, but after the death of the servant who maintained it, it had been abandoned. Neil lamented the waste, envisioning the potential for gatherings and beauty treatments. The idea intrigues Clark. He wonders if Letitia will enjoy such a place. Neil, sensing his interest, promises to arrange for the restoration of the hot spring, though Nathan's excitement earned him a scolding for his childish behavior. As the two bicker, Clark remains lost in thought, another memory surfacing from the depths of his mind. The first time he had met Letitia, she had been introduced to the king and queen, standing before them with wide eyes filled with curiosity. Unaware of the arrangement that would one day bind them, she'd approached the couple, captivating them with her curious and eager nature. It was then he would make his presence known, locking his eyes with her for the first time. The sound of Nathan's voice pulls Clark back from his thoughts, grounding him once more in the present. Nathan has been asking about a book, The Sorrow of the Young Gordon. Clark admits that he had never been particularly fond of the story, its tragic ending making it more of a sorrowful love tale and something he would enjoy. While he understands the beauty in such narratives, he prefers stories with happy endings, where love triumphed rather than faded away in a heartbreak. Clark then remembers another thing from the past. He could recall countless moments when she struggled to perfect her posture, and he would watch her secretly, finding her determination endearing. It was during one of these secret observations that he had first encountered Nader. Unlike Letitia, Nader had immediately noticed Clark's presence and wasted no time introducing himself. The rumors surrounding Nader had painted him as someone eager to benefit from his sister's engagement to a prince, yet when confronted, Nader dismissed such notions entirely. He had assured Clark that his only concern was Letitia's happiness, and that he would only ever support her union if he believed Clark to be a good man. At the time, Clark had denied spying on his fiancée, though it was clear that Nader had not believed him. The encounter had marked the start of an unusual dynamic between them. The memory fades as Clark turns his attention to the chessboard in front of him. He was engaged in a match against Nathan, yet his focus wavers. Neil and Nadir re-enter the study, glancing over the board to see who has the upper hand. Nathan remained composed, making his final move with ease, trapping Clark in a decisive checkmate. Nadir, confident in his own ability, offered to play the next round. Knowing the game would last longer between the two, the group decided to bring out tea, preparing for an extended match. Another memory from his wandering mind pulls up, one from long ago when he had come across a group of castle servants whispering amongst themselves in hushed, worried tones. His heart had clenched at the sight, and his mind had immediately jumped to the conclusion that something bad had happened to Letitia. Without hesitation, he had begun searching the castle. His search had led him to the greenhouse, where he had heard soft, muffled cries. Following the sound, he found her crouched behind a thick patch of bushes. Stepping forward, he called out to her gently, offering his hand and urging her to come back inside. Everyone was worried about her. For the first time, he had felt as if his words had weight, that she might actually listen to him. But before she could take his hand, Nadir arrived. Upon seeing her brother, Letitia immediately rushed into his arms, her distress spilling over as she begged to be taken home. She no longer wanted to stay in the castle. She no longer wanted to endure the lessons. Nadir, understanding her turmoil, had reassured Clark that he would take Letitia home for the day to calm down. By morning, she would return, ready to face her responsibilities once again. The memory left Clark feeling restless. He opened the window, letting in a small bird that had been fluttering outside before gazing toward the very spot where Letitia used to have her lessons. He remembered how he had once complained about them to Nadir when they were a little older, convinced that with each passing day, the rigid training was dimming the light in her eyes. Nadir remained puzzled by Clark's frustration. Letitia had finally grown into a proper lady, one fit to become queen. Frustrated, Clark turned to Nadir for help, asking for a way to make her smile again. Nadir recalled his sister's love for sweet desserts and suggested that Clark give her something she would genuinely enjoy. Taking the advice to heart, Clark carefully presented a box of sweets to Letitia during their tea sessions. She accepted the gift with polite grace but did not open the box in front of him. Her expression remained unreadable, and not once did a smile cross her lips. Defeated, Clark later recounted the moment to Nadir, lamenting that his efforts had been in vain. To his surprise, Nadir casually admitted that Letitia had, in fact, been quite happy about the present. She had enjoyed the desserts thoroughly, though she had never expressed her gratitude in front of Clark. While the revelation offered some relief, Clark couldn't shake the lingering worry. Letitia remained distant, even if she had been pleased by the gift. Wanting to bridge the gap between them, Nadir proposed that they should start calling each other by their first names. It was then that Clark realized something peculiar. Unlike Letitia, who always addressed him with the utmost formality, Nadir had never once called him Your Highness. When he pointed this out, Nadir simply shrugged and explained that his goal was to be close to his future brother-in-law. The next day, as Clark and Letitia walked through a field of white roses, he attempted to compliment her beauty, hoping for even the slightest reaction. However, Letitia remained as stoic as ever. Frustrated but determined, he brought up the topic of their impending marriage, explaining that since they were to be equals, she should address him by his first name. Letitia hesitated, struggling to find a reason to maintain formality. However, after much internal debate, she eventually gave in, though not entirely. Instead of calling him simply Clark, she settled on Clark-sama. While the outcome disappointed Clark, he accepted it as a small step in the right direction. As time passed, Clark began to rely more on Nadir as his confidant, frequently seeking insight into Letitia's true feelings. One day, Nadir, ever blunt, delivered an answer that shook him to his core. He told the prince that Letitia had no romantic interest in Clark. In fact, it was entirely possible that she didn't even remember his face properly. He and Clark devised a bold plan to force Letitia into revealing more of her true emotions. An upcoming ball presented the perfect opportunity. Nadir suggested that Clark attend with another partner, letting Letitia believe, if only for a moment, that their engagement had been called off. If she truly felt nothing for Clark, she would remain indifferent, but if even a flicker of jealousy surfaced, they would finally have proof that there was hope for her heart to change. Nadir advised Clark that Letitia might react unpredictably, so under no circumstances should he directly state that he was ending the engagement. During the ball, Letitia proved Nadir's theory correct. Misinterpreting Clark's actions, she hastily concluded that their engagement had been broken. Overwhelmed by a surge of joy, she openly confessed her feelings, eager to leave palace life. After the event, Clark and Nadir regrouped to discuss their next move. A few days later, Clark discreetly followed Letitia to Alberta, curious to see how she was coping. He spotted her heading toward her usual fishing spot, a rare sight of unguarded joy illuminating her face. Seeing her genuinely smiling at herself filled Clark with relief. As Letitia ventured further into the woods, Clark attempted to shadow her as subtly as possible, mimicking her careful steps. However, the uneven terrain made his pursuit challenging. Unbeknownst to both of them, Nader had also been stealthily tailing Clark. When Nader finally caught up to him, he urged Clark to call out to Letitia, forcing a direct encounter. But Clark instructed him to contact the castle and arrange for a river to be constructed before he called out to her. Later that afternoon, Clark and Nader reconvened, with Clark expressing frustration over how easily Nader got to witness Letitia's carefree nature. Nader proposed yet another plan to have Clark capture Letitia that night. In another memory, Clark found himself reminiscing about their very first encounter. He recalled the way their eyes had met, Letitia's innocence shining through as she eagerly reached for his hand. Returning to the present, Clark and Nader observe Letitia as she finally smiles within the castle grounds, surrounded by friends. Nader, pleased with himself, gave an approving nod, satisfied that his elaborate scheme had succeeded. He casually remarks that Clark would soon be producing an heir with his sister. However, Clark's response catches him off guard. Contrary to expectations, Clark admitted that he had yet to touch Letitia. His restraint was intentional. He wanted to respect both her wishes and the sanctity of their marriage. Before the conversation could continue, Nathan approached them, his curiosity piqued. Dale and his 3 sons settle into their seats at a lively inn, enjoying a well-prepared meal after their long journey. The hearty food makes the trip to the Astor Royal Castle all the more worth it since everyone is enjoying their meals. Dale, having been commissioned by Neil to repair the recently discovered Roman bath, is eager to see his brother again and take in the grandeur of a land he has never visited before. His sons, equally excited, fill the air with chatter, imagining what the castle might look like and speculating about the kind of work their father will be doing. The eldest son is especially eager to see the different cultures the other kingdom must have. Unbeknownst to the rest of the family, the youngest of Dale's sons has smuggled a small animal in his bag. He carefully sneaks bits of food to his hidden companion, hoping to keep his presence a secret. Meanwhile, at the palace, Letitia enjoys a peaceful afternoon in her chambers, accompanied by her usual group of friends. The lighthearted atmosphere, however, is about to be shattered, as none of them are aware that Layla, Letitia's strict tutor, is already on her way to meet her. The moment Layla arrives, the room falls silent, the earlier laughter disappearing as if it had never existed. With her ever-stern expression, Layla quickly demands Letitia's attention. Without hesitation, Layla orders Letitia back to the lesson room and instructs her to perform her customary bow. Seeing that Letitia's form is sloppier than before, Layla's disappointment is evident. Letitia struggles to hold her position, her muscles shaking under the strain. Within moments, she collapses to her knees in exhaustion, already dreading the return of her strict training regimen. Later that evening, frustrated by the rigid expectations placed upon her once again, Letitia attempts to escape the palace. Just as she slips into the courtyard, she collides with Lyle, who is also sneaking about. Lyle, looking equally guilty, confesses that he has been assigned to deliver reports back to his kingdom, but has been unable to do so. Instead, he has spent the entire day being used as Prince Louis' training dummy, helping the love-struck prince practice his declaration of love to Maria. Meanwhile, Letitia admits that while things are progressing well between her and Prince Clark, she still longs for freedom. Now that her princess lessons have restarted, she realizes just how much she values her independence. Lyle sympathizes with her, having witnessed firsthand how merciless Layla has been that afternoon. He even likens her suffering to his own predicament, being forced to endure Louis' endless poetic declarations of love while he himself is unable to meet his own lover, who remains in the opposite kingdom. Letitia, surprised to learn that Lyle has a lover, suddenly feels a sense of camaraderie with him. Seeing that they both wish to escape their burdens, Letitia and Lyle declare their intent to break free, dramatically proclaiming their desires to reclaim their lives by shouting them into the night sky. However, their grand exclamations echo through the halls, awakening the entire castle. Within moments, the two are promptly caught before they can even attempt an escape. Their disruptive behavior has disrespected Clark and Louis, leading to significant embarrassment for the royal family. They try to defend themselves, with Letitia arguing that Lyle deserves his freedom, as no one should be forced to endure Louis' endless poetry. Lyle, in turn, insists that Letitia has every right to be free, especially since she was promised an end to her lessons, only to have them reinstated. At that moment, Nader steps in to correct them, calmly pointing out that Letitia is no longer undergoing princess lessons. Instead, she has officially transitioned into queen lessons, which, according to him, are entirely different matters. They continue to sympathize with each other, reinforcing their shared frustration and demanding freedom from their confined lives in the palace. However, their complaints stretch on for too long, and Clark's patience finally wears thin. With no one else stepping in to stop them, he firmly puts an end to their dramatic exchange, his scolding voice cutting through their lamentations. With the conversation forcefully ended, everyone retreats to their respective rooms. Letitia, however, refuses to accept defeat. Determined to find an alternative route out of her chambers, she meticulously searches every corner of the room, unwilling to use the guarded door. Eventually, she spots a small air hole near the wall, narrow, but just wide enough for her to attempt slipping through. With no better option, she hoists herself up, squeezing her upper body through the opening. For a brief moment, she dares to believe she might succeed, until she suddenly feels resistance around her waist. No matter how much she struggles, she remains firmly wedged in place. While she struggles to free herself, every attempt is futile, and she ends up stuck in the same position till the first hints of morning light creep into the room, signaling the arrival of a new day. At sunrise, Clark enters her chambers, intending to discuss the previous night's events in private. As he surveys the space, something unusual catches his attention. A pair of legs dangle helplessly from a small hole in the wall. Approaching the scene, he watches as Letitia, still trapped, reluctantly admits to her failed escape attempt. She pleads for assistance, clearly desperate to be freed from her predicament. Embarrassment takes a backseat to urgency as she remains stuck, unable to move on her own. After several tries, she suddenly pops out of the hole, tumbling straight into his arms. Relief washes over her, and in an unguarded moment, she instinctively embraces him in gratitude. However, awareness quickly returns and she recoils, composing herself. After yesterday's events, Letitia hides in a storage unit beneath the floor, curling into the cramped space to avoid detection. Frustration lingers as she reflects on the harshness of her lessons, a decline in her physical agility, and the realization that she has gained weight since abandoning her previous discipline. As she listens to approaching footsteps, she remains still, overhearing Maria and Lily's conversation. Shame creeps in as she realizes that nearly everyone in the palace is aware of her embarrassing predicament. Before she can dwell further on her humiliation, another voice interrupts her thoughts. She recognizes it as Clark's. His calm, patient tone coaxes her out of hiding. Recognizing her distress, he offers a distraction. He leads her outside, guiding her through the palace grounds until they arrive at an open field. To her surprise, her friends are already gathered, sitting atop a picnic mat beneath the warm sunlight. Their presence immediately lifts her spirits, a carefree atmosphere starkly contrasting the rigid structure of her daily lessons. Letitia is greeted by a delightful array of snacks, the scent of freshly baked pastries mixing with the crisp afternoon air. Around her, the familiar faces of her friends light up with excitement, their expressions warm and welcoming. It is a rare moment of pure relaxation, and she allows herself to indulge in it. As she stretches out, sinking into the comforting embrace of nature as she lies on the grass, she is surprised when Clark settles down beside her. The atmosphere is peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of her usual lessons and expectations. She admits that she is beginning to enjoy her time here, especially with him. There is a sincerity in her voice that makes Clark pause, his gaze softening as he reaches toward her. But just before his fingers can brush against hers, Neil suddenly interrupts. His arrival is abrupt, and he announces that a surprise awaits them, and he leads them toward the greenhouse. Just outside, they are greeted by Dale and his 3 sons, who stand proudly before their finished project. The restoration of the Roman bath is finally complete, and Dale's kids confidently assure them that the repairs will last for years to come. Letitia listens in awe, recognizing Dale as the man who once abandoned royalty in pursuit of adventure. Her enthusiasm extends to his sons, eager to hear their perspectives on a life spent exploring. The children, grinning with pride, eagerly admit how happy they are traveling. Neil, amused by Letitia's curiosity, chimes in, teasing that Dale's story of how he met his wife and relinquished the throne is a tale worth hearing. Dale promises to recount it for her another time, and Letitia's eager anticipation is evident. Clark, however, feels uneasy since he has just gotten her used to life inside the palace. Deciding to enjoy the bath, Letitia and Claire quickly change into their swimwear. The warmth of the water, combined with the lush greenery of the greenhouse, creates a serene and inviting atmosphere. Brianna and Nader eagerly join them, relishing the rare opportunity to unwind in such a luxurious setting. Their relaxation is momentarily interrupted when, out of nowhere, Lewis swims past them, his bare backside unmistakably visible. The sight elicits laughter from the girls, the unexpected absurdity lightening the mood. Neil, sipping his drink, praises his brother's craftsmanship, crediting him for their ability to enjoy such a pleasant afternoon. Just as he raises his glass in celebration, the greenhouse trembles. The joyful chatter fades as a monstrous figure emerges, towering over them with an imposing presence. Neil immediately recognizes the creature as a Milo. Letitia, on the other hand, stares in disbelief. She had always imagined Milas as small, adorable creatures, much like the delicate figure in the music box Clark had gifted her. Realizing she had been compared to such a terrifying carnivore leaves her feeling oddly insulted. Before she can complain about her indignation, Brianna snaps her out of her thoughts, reminding her that arguing with Clark won't help their current predicament. The situation demands immediate action. Neil urges the girls to retreat while Clark and Nader scramble to come up with a plan. The realization dawns on them quickly. They are practically defenseless. With no weapons and only loose fabric covering them, their options are limited. Nader suggests fetching the guards, but Clark admits that he had intentionally dismissed them earlier, reasoning out that he didn't want anyone else to catch sight of Letitia's exposed skin. As the group scrambles to retreat toward the back of the greenhouse, a sudden realization strikes them. Louis is still in the bath, blissfully unaware of the danger looming behind him. Just as the situation dawns on him, Maria bursts into the scene, sword in hand. Without hesitation, she rushes toward the massive Milo and strikes it with a sheathed weapon. Dale and two of his sons rush in, their expressions determined. His children quickly hand swords to Nader and Clark, arming them in case the Milo decides to charge. Meanwhile, Brianna begins to panic, but Letitia notices something strange about the creature's behavior. Instead of launching an attack, the Milo appears to be searching for something, its movements more desperate than aggressive. Lily enters the greenhouse, followed closely by Dale's youngest son. Letitia and Brianna immediately notice that the boy is cradling a tiny Milo in his arms. It doesn't take long for them to put the pieces together. The larger Milo must be searching for its offspring. However, Maria, Clark, Nader, and Dale are still on high alert, preparing to attack at a moment's notice. Dale, experienced in combat, makes the first move, raising his weapon to strike. Just before his axe can descend, Lily's voice rings out, demanding that they stop. Everyone hesitates, their curiosity piqued as they watch the enormous Milo slowly approach Lily and Dale's youngest son. The child hesitates, but eventually places the baby Milo into Lily's waiting hands. With careful movements, Lily steps forward and extends the tiny creature toward the larger Milo. The tension in the air is palpable, but the moment the massive beast sees its offspring, its aggression fades and exits the greenhouse. The sounds of the commotion reach outside, where Lyle, unaware of what has just happened, unpacks luggage. Back inside, Clark remains focused on Letitia, determined to keep her spirits high after the unexpected ordeal. He doesn't want her to retreat back into her hiding spot beneath the floor again. However, just as he succeeds in lifting her mood, Layla suddenly appears, her presence as imposing as ever. Without delay, she informs Letitia that her lessons will resume the following day. Rather than groaning in frustration, Letitia surprises everyone by making an unexpected request. She wants gardening to be added to her lessons. She explains that she wants to create a space in the palace where everyone can relax and enjoy nature together. Layla, taken aback by the unusual request, gives it some thought before ultimately agreeing to discuss it further in their next lesson. Meanwhile, back at the Roman bath, Louis and Nathan have chosen to ignore the prior chaos entirely, happily floating in the warm water. Lyle, clearly exasperated, tries to lecture them on how Roman baths are traditionally meant for soaking feet, not for swimming. However, Nathan argues that in his kingdom, baths are meant to be enjoyed this way, so he sees no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to float freely. Seizing the moment, he challenges Louis to a breath-holding competition. Despite Lyle's visible reluctance, he is immediately appointed as the referee, much to his dismay. One morning, Letitia is peacefully sleeping, only to be jolted awake by Maria's urgent voice. The mention of the tea event with Queen Laura sends a wave of panic through her as she realizes she has overslept. In a frantic rush, she throws off the covers and scrambles to prepare herself. Maria, equally flustered, hurries to help her get ready, fussing over her appearance. Lily, having watched the entire scene unfold, finally steps in with an audible cough, scolding both of them for their disorganized behavior. Her voice carries a tone strikingly similar to Layla's, making Letitia momentarily uneasy. As they walk through the castle halls toward the tea event, the feeling lingers. Maria tells Letitia that Lily and Layla have been close ever since their arrival at the palace. The thought unsettles Letitia, but she brushes it aside, focusing on the path ahead. However, her attention is soon drawn to something unfamiliar. A set of grand double doors, wide open, catches her eye. She is certain she has never seen them before. Curiosity gets the better of her, and she runs towards the door. Unable to resist, she steps through the doorway. Inside, she finds herself in a vast, empty room. The floor is bare, but the walls are adorned with paintings and large windows that allow soft sunlight to stream in. Her gaze drifts across the artwork, but one painting in particular holds her attention. It depicts two young children in a lush garden, the boy carefully placing a delicate flower crown on the girl's head. Something about it feels oddly familiar, but before she can dwell on it any further, Maria's voice calls her back to reality. At the tea event, Letitia is met with the presence of several noble women, including Layla, who wastes no time in criticizing her lack of refinement. Letitia braces herself for another round of corrections, but Queen Laura, ever composed, waves off the stiffness of formality. The queen expresses how much she has missed Letitia, lamenting that ever since the ghost case, no one has dared to enter her beloved spa room. Today's gathering, she explains, is simply an opportunity to catch up. As the conversation drifts toward Clark, Letitia answers the queen's questions, only for Layla to interject each time, correcting her responses. Suddenly, Letitia is asked if she loves Clark. After a pause, Letitia blurts out quietly that she hates him. The The room falls into a brief silence. However, Layla and Queen Laura exchange knowing glances, their eyes landing on Letitia's face, where a soft blush has bloomed. The Queen is amused by Letitia's feeble attempt at a lie. She expresses her delight in knowing that Letitia still treasures Clark as her first love. Letitia stiffens at the statement since she was not aware that Clake was ever her first love. Later in her room, Letitia sits comfortably with Brianna, enjoying tea and snacks. Letitia remarks on how security has loosened around her, a sign that the palace now trusts her more. However, Brianna is confused as to why Letitia had decided to stay in her current modest quarters instead of moving to the more luxurious rooms available to her. Letitia simply responds that she finds her current room far more relaxing. Deciding to move on from the topic, Letitia confesses a more pressing concern: her struggle to understand love. The moment the word leaves her lips, Maria gets excited. Conversations about love always ignite her enthusiasm. Fueled by her passion for romance novels, she eagerly explains that love is different for everyone, but one constant remains: those truly in love are willing to cast aside everything, status and all, for the sake of the person they cherish. Maria then boldly admits to having her own ideal type. She dreams of experiencing a grand romance with someone muscular and stronger than her. After some coaxing, Brianna finally shares that she has experienced first love before, describing it as a warm, exhilarating feeling that lingers in her heart. Letitia and Maria listen intently, captivated by Brianna's words as she paints first love as something magical and fleeting. However, when pressed for details, Brianna remains elusive, unwilling to share too much. She does, however, express a belief that first love rarely works out. Yet she insists that even if it doesn't last, preserving it as a beautiful memory is enough. Letitia is intrigued by the idea, but before she can reflect on it further, Brianna and Maria become absorbed in their discussion of ideal romantic partners. That evening, as she lays in bed, she finds herself restless. The conversation about love replays in her mind, stirring emotions she doesn't quite understand. No matter how much she tries to grasp the meaning of love, it remains elusive, slipping through her thoughts like sand through her fingers. Her gaze lands on the music box Clark had given her, sitting quietly on her nightstand. Reaching for it, she lifts the lid and the soft melody begins to play. The tiny Bilo figurine spins gracefully, and something about the delicate tune fills her with an unexplainable yearning. Without thinking, she rises from her bed with her eyes closed and begins to dance, allowing herself to be swept away by the music. She twirls, imagining herself in a grand ballroom, the air filled with warmth and elegance. As she extends her hand mid-dance, she suddenly feels the phantom sensation of another hand grasping hers, strong, familiar, reassuring. A vivid image of Clark's gentle smile fills her mind, and for a fleeting moment, it feels as though he is right there with her. But as she opens her eyes, reality settles in. She is alone in her room, with only the soft hum of the music box echoing in the stillness. The next morning, Letitia finds herself standing before the same painting of the boy and girl once again. A light breeze drifts through the open window, carrying golden petals from a nearby tree. As she gazes outside, something about the sight tugs at her memories. A long-forgotten image resurfaces of herself and Clark as children, laughing beneath the shade of a similar tree. Turning back to the painting, realization dawns upon her. The children depicted aren't just any figures. They are her and Clark, captured in a moment of pure, untainted happiness. Drawn by the sight of the tree, she steps toward the window, longing to see it up close. Memories stir once more. She recalls a time when, as a young girl, she had eagerly asked her father for permission to climb a tree in the palace gardens. He had dismissed her request, too absorbed in his conversation with other officials to acknowledge her curiosity. Undeterred, she had wandered off, eager to explore on her own. It was then that she stumbled upon a breathtaking sight, a massive tree adorned with golden blossoms, its branches stretching toward the sky. Mesmerized, she had decided to climb it, eager to reach its highest point. Settling onto a sturdy branch, she had felt a sense of triumph, reveling in the view of the palace gardens from above. From her perch, she could still see her father in the distance. The tree's blossoms carried a subtle, sweet fragrance, and as the warm breeze rustled the leaves, a deep sense of comfort had washed over her. The gentle sway in the branches and the soothing scent had lulled her into a drowsy state, making the moment feel almost like a dream. And then, as if struck by lightning, the memory surged through Letitia's mind, clear, vivid, and undeniable. A boy had been calling out to her, his voice filled with urgency. The fragmented pieces of the past began to fall into place as she rushed toward the tree, her heart pounding with anticipation. The closer she got, the clearer the memory became. She had been perched on a thick branch, lulled by the tree's comforting scent, when the boy's panicked voice rang through the air. He had been shouting for her to wake up, afraid she would fall. But his frantic calls startled her so much that she lost her balance. She could still see it, those wide, shocked blue eyes as Clark rushed forward, arms outstretched, desperately trying to catch her. It was a memory she had long forgotten. Wanting to savor the moment, she settled onto one of the sturdy branches of the old tree, inhaling its familiar fragrance. It smelled just as it had all those years ago, sweet, earthy, and nostalgic. Below, Clark approaches, his presence unmistakable. Standing beneath the tree, he gazed up at her, undoubtedly recalling the very same memory. The day of their first meeting had started unpleasant with him. It had begun with tiresome lessons and the endless cycle of formalities that drained his energy. Forced to pass through the garden on his way back to the castle, he had been eager to retreat from the world. The last thing he expected was an unfamiliar sound coming from the trees. At first, he had thought it was a beast nestled in the branches, but upon searching for the source, he found something unexpected. A girl with red hair cascading over her shoulders, sound asleep on a branch of the tree. Concerned that she might slip, he had called out to her. His voice, perhaps too loud in his urgency, had startled her awake. The moment of confusion had been brief but disastrous. Before she could fully regain her senses, she lost her balance. Clark reacted with urgency, quickly running to where she would land so she could break her fall. The impact had been sudden, a tangle of limbs and fabric as she landed on top of him. By the time he recovered from the shock, her father had arrived, concern etched across his face as he checked both her and the prince for injuries. It was then that Clark learned her name, Letitia. She had looked at him, a radiant smile breaking across her face as she waved goodbye as her father had carried her away. Now standing beneath the same tree, Clark watches as Letitia balances on the branches above. Suddenly she jumps, her hands outstretched as if running in for a hug. The fall was brief, but instinct took over. Clark caught her, arms wrapped securely around her. Clark scolds her for doing something so crazy. Letitia smiles at Clark, admitting that she had finally remembered a moment in their childhood and was confident that if she were to jump off the tree, Clark would catch her using an embrace. They had met several times after that fateful day. One afternoon, she had attempted to weave a flower crown for him. However, when she finished, she grew frustrated that her creation did not look as perfect as she had envisioned. Clark, ever patient, had taken the delicate wreath from her hands and adjusted it with ease. Once satisfied with his work, he gently placed it atop her head, a proud smile lighting up his face. Even then, Clark had already fallen in love with her. In his youthful innocence, he had asked Letitia to be his wife. Without hesitation, she had agreed, her face beaming with excitement as she threw her arms around him in an affectionate hug. In the spur of the moment, she had even planted a small kiss on his cheek, sealing their childhood promise. Now, as they stand beneath the very same tree, Letitia takes in the changes that have occurred over the years. She hadn't remembered this part of the palace as it had long faded from her memory. Clark, standing beside her, acknowledges that time has altered many things, but his feelings for her never wavered. That moment, when she had fallen from the tree and into his arms, had marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one filled with warmth and color. Letitia listens to his declaration of love, her heart stirred by the realization that she had been his first love all along. The knowledge that they had been each other's first fills her with an unexpected sense of joy. She had always sworn to decide her own future, to marry a man she truly loved rather than one chosen for her. Now there was no doubt in her heart, her feelings for Clark were clear. Clark had always been her type, his looks, personality, and unwavering in his love. She just hadn't allowed herself to realize it until now. With a soft smile, Clark carefully tucked some flowers into her hair just as he had done in their childhood. Then, leaning in, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a silent promise of devotion. Letitia, at last, allowed herself to fully embrace her feelings. As she gazes into his eyes, she knows with certainty she had loved him then, and she loves him now. After Letitia finally confesses her feelings for Clark, the castle now buzzes with excitement as preparations for the royal wedding progress. Every day they face countless decisions, from floral arrangements to seating charts, each choice emphasizing how significant the day is not only for them, but for their people. Letitia, however, struggles to keep her patience. Her voice echoes through the castle halls as she declares her exhaustion, leaving a trail of startled onlookers. Later in the afternoon, Clark and his father stand by the balcony, watching as Letitia paces furiously through the palace garden. Maria trails behind her, attempting to soothe her. The king smiles softly, recalling similar moments of frustration from his own wedding preparations. He offers Clark a few words of comfort, reminding him that the pressures of a royal wedding are burdensome but temporary. Clark listens, but his thoughts linger elsewhere. As his eyes follow Letitia's animated movements, he voices a thought that has been weighing on his heart. He asks his father if he has ever wondered what life might be like without the burden of royalty, a simple existence, tending fields with the woman he loves. The king remains silent, considering his son's words. Meanwhile, Lyle wanders into the room and overhears their conversation. When Clark firmly declares that he would relinquish the throne if it means ensuring Letitia's happiness, Lyle's eyes widen. He rushes off to report the news to Lewis, who is skeptical at first. But the possibility of Clark abandoning his title intrigues him, especially since it would mean Maria would no longer be bound to Letitia's service. Seizing the opportunity, Lewis quickly offers Maria a position at his side in his own kingdom. Maria, however, is troubled by the revelation. The thought of her friend giving up her royal status for love leaves her conflicted. Ultimately, she resolves to remain by Letitia's side, valuing her happiness above all else. She vows to support Letitia and Clark no matter the outcome. Still, Maria can't help but share the story with Lily. She frames it as a romantic tale, a prince willing to abandon his crown for his beloved. Practical as always, she reminds Maria that even if the couple wishes to elope, they can't survive long without financial security. Lily advises against taking any drastic action without Clark and Letitia's knowledge, but Maria, now determined, can't ignore the reality of the situation. Her mind drifts to thoughts of money, knowing it would be essential for a life beyond the castle walls. Eventually, the story reaches Brianna. Lily relays her concerns, speculating that Clark and Letitia might seek out the adventurer Dale, who often shares tales of his travels. The thought of the royal couple embarking on a grand adventure like Dale worries Brianna, since she's aware the king will probably never fund their life outside of royalty. Brianna and Lily are both determined to help Clark and Letitia start a new life together. Lily, though loyal to her duties, feels a stronger attachment to Letitia, the girl she practically raised. However, as his servant, she knows her actions are limited. If Nadir, ever watchful, were to discover the couple's plan to elope, he would undoubtedly intervene. Seeking guidance and support, Lily confides in Brianna, who readily promises to help in any way she can. To divert suspicion, Brianna cleverly devises a plan. She spreads a rumor suggesting that Clark and Letitia will conclude their wedding with a grand romantic performance. According to her fabricated story, the couple will stage a playful escape, symbolizing the beginning of their adventurous life together. As part of the act, they will dramatically seize the kingdom's treasured royal necklace, running off into the distance. She shares this tale with Catherine and Isabella, explaining that the true nature of the performance will remain a secret for most attendees to maintain an air of surprise. Trusting Brianna's words, the girls eagerly agree to help her arrange an escape route, believing they are aiding in a harmless charade. Meanwhile, Nadir assigns Lily to oversee wedding preparations, but the weight of her secret makes it difficult to concentrate. She hurries to do her tasks so Nadir won't catch her odd behavior. Isabella and Catherine later relay Brianna's plan to Neil, believing he is already aware of it. To maintain his composure, Neil pretends to know all about the supposed performance. However, when the girls mention the royal necklace, his feigned confidence falters. The necklace, a priceless gift from his kingdom and a symbol of friendship, holds immense significance. Learning that it may be used in the stunt leaves him deeply unsettled. As the tension builds, Nadir summons Brianna for a private conversation. His sharp gaze and stern tone make it clear that he suspects her involvement in something clandestine. Yet even when cornered, Brianna refuses to waver. She remains stubborn and evasive, protecting Letitia and Clark's secret. In a sudden burst of defiance, she pushes past Nadir and flees. Neil, unable to shake his growing concern, seeks answers from Nathan. He learns that Clark had indeed chosen the necklace personally, valuing its symbolism. The realization that Clark intends to involve the necklace in his staged escape further troubles Neil. The gesture seems far too reckless for a simple performance, deepening his doubts about the true intentions behind the rumored plan. Meanwhile, Lily and Maria gather in the laundry room, their conversation hushed. Both are committed to supporting Clark and Letitia, but a new worry has taken root. They know the couple's compassionate nature well, so well that they fear any savings they bring along will soon be spent helping whichever village they choose to settle in. Clark and Letitia's desire to aid others is admirable, but without proper financial management, their lives as commoners could quickly become challenging. Despite their misgivings, Lily and Maria stand firm in their resolve. They understand the risks of aiding the couple's escape, knowing it could jeopardize their positions within the palace. However, whispers of the supposed performance inevitably spread, reaching the ears of Layla. Unlike the others, Layla is skeptical. She tells Isabella and Catherine that there is no such performance planned. Layla demands that Catherine and Isabella tell her everything they know about the supposed wedding performance. The worry in her voice is evident. She has a strong feeling that something isn't right, and the possibility that Letitia and Clark might be planning something drastic fills her with dread. Determined to uncover the truth, she insists that they come clean. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit hallway of the palace, Neil and Nadir cross paths. Neil, burdened by the weight of his concerns, can no longer keep the information to himself. Overwhelmed by his emotions, he spills everything he knows about the rumors of Clark and Letitia's staged escape. The mention of the royal necklace deeply troubles Nadir. Layla, still distraught, seeks out Sebastian. Upon hearing the rumors, her heart aches. She had poured her soul into teaching Letitia, determined to mold her into a poised and dignified queen. Now the idea that Letitia would abandon it all feels like a betrayal. Sebastian, who had dedicated his life to caring for Clark, shares her pain. Tears well up in his eyes as the realization sinks in. The two stand in shared sorrow, devastated by the possibility of losing the future they had worked so hard to build. Elsewhere, Letitia lounges in her chambers, enjoying a plate of her favorite snacks. Despite the quiet comfort of the moment, she wonders why her friends are nowhere to be seen. Normally, Maria, Lily, or Brianna would be keeping a watchful eye on her, often playfully intervening in her many attempts to escape her duties. In another part of the palace, Lily and Maria are busy preparing to support Letitia, anxiously anticipating the couple's next move. Brianna, meanwhile, roams the halls, satisfied with how well her rumor has spread. Lyle and Louise, on the other hand, engage in a hushed discussion about the kingdom's uncertain future. With the possibility of Clark abandoning his royal title, They speculate on who might ascend the throne in his place. Catherine and Isabella remain equally bewildered, no longer sure what to believe. Before long, Nader, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, demands that everyone gather in the Great Hall. Present is Layla and Sebastian, who are also curious about the truth. Nader is determined to confront the rumors head-on and uncover the truth. He sternly asks who started the chain of gossip. Lyle, fidgeting nervously, reluctantly raises his hand. He confesses to overhearing Clark's conversation with the king. Apparently, he had heard Clark tell the king that he would give up the throne for Letitia's smile. Just as the tension reaches its peak, Letitia enters. She demands to know Clark's whereabouts, her voice strong and mildly upset after hearing such a foolish declaration. Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, she makes her way to the throne room. Inside, Clark is in an audience with his parents and Nathan, the atmosphere tense as they discuss something important. Before anyone can react, Letitia bursts through the doorway, clutching the music box Clark had once given her. The frustration in her voice is evident as she demands an explanation. She accuses Clark of making a selfish decision. The thought of him sacrificing his title, the very responsibility he once swore to uphold, infuriates her. She reminds him of the many times he had spoken about protecting his people, and she questions whether all of his promises were merely empty words. She hurls the music box to the ground, clearly upset that Clark is not taking his position seriously. To Letitia's confusion, Clark simply smiles, his expression soft and amused. The tension in the room disappears, and everyone seems to understand that there is a big misunderstanding. With a gentle tone, Clark suggests that they talk things through properly. He reassures her that she's misunderstood the situation. At his father's nod of approval, Clark recounts their conversation in full. He explains that the idea of giving up his title was never a true plan, but rather an expression of the depth of his feelings for Letitia. In truth, his resolve to become a strong and capable king has only grown. He wants to rule with Letitia by his side, making choices that will bring prosperity to their people. Every decision he has made has been with her in mind, determined to be a king she can be proud of. After hearing the truth, a wave of extreme embarrassment washes over Letitia. The realization of what she has just done, accusing and insulting her future husband in front of his parents and another prince of another country, is unbearable. The shame burns through her, and without thinking, she turns and runs from the room. Her swift exit leaves the chamber in stunned silence, and Clark watches her retreat with a mixture of surprise and concern. Clark quickly picks up the music box, cradling the delicate remains in his hands. The king, with an understanding smile, urges his son to go after her. Clark doesn't hesitate. He sprints down the hall, determined not to let Letitia's embarrassment or misunderstanding drive a wedge between them. Days pass, and the preparations for the royal wedding proceed as planned. Finally, the long-awaited day arrives. Letitia, surrounded by her friends, stands in her chambers as they assist her in donning her bridal gown. The girls struggle to fasten her corset, each tug tightening it further. Despite the discomfort, Letitia grits her teeth, determined to endure it. She knows the eyes of the entire kingdom will be on her today. Finally, at the chapel, Jordan, Letitia's father, fights back tears as he prepares himself for the moment he will walk his daughter down the aisle. The weight of the occasion stirs a deep pride within him. Letitia takes a final glance around her before the chapel doors open. Brianna, Isabella, and Catherine beam with pride as they hold onto her trail. On the sidelines, Layla, Maria, and Lyle watch, their eyes reflecting the love and admiration they have for her. Each of them has played a part in her journey, and their presence fills her with a sense of comfort and reassurance. The grand doors creak open, and sunlight floods the chapel, illuminating the polished marble floors and the intricate floral arrangements. Letitia steps forward, her father at her side. As she walks, she spots Louis, Nathan, and Neil, the three royals representing the neighboring kingdom. Further ahead, Queen Laura and King Maurice, along with Matthias, gaze at her fondly, their smiles warm and genuine. Nader and Letitia's mother are also present, their eyes shining with pride and relief. They had worried, doubted, and hoped for this moment. Seeing Letitia poised and radiant, they know their daughter has come into her own. Finally, Letitia reaches the front of the chapel, where Clark stands waiting. The moment their eyes meet, all the tension from the past days vanishes. Reaching Clark, Letitia leans in, her heart pounding, and at long last they kiss, sealing their marriage. At that moment, she realizes that now that she is married, she can never truly run away for good. Prince Matthias wanders through the grand halls of the castle, his curious eyes scanning every corner in search of Letitia. The young prince, full of mischief, wonders if he might catch sight of her near the gardens. However, as he approaches the wide-open front entrance, the heavy doors suddenly slam shut, blocking his way. Just as Matthias contemplates pushing them open again, Layla catches sight of him. She swiftly approaches, her stern yet gentle presence making the boy flinch. Layla reprimands him for roaming around without an escort. Though her words are soft, Matthias knows better than to argue. Meanwhile, Letitia sits comfortably on a shaded patio, enjoying a fragrant breeze that sweeps across the garden while sipping her tea. Speaking to an imaginary audience, she recounts the recent events that have forever changed her life. She smiles as she recalls her wedding day, a beautiful ceremony filled with joy and celebration. The people of the Astor Kingdom had cheered as she and Prince Clark exchanged vows. He had looked especially handsome, his blue eyes reflecting the happiness of the day. Even Prince Nathan and Prince Niall, who had since returned to the Delbaran Kingdom, left with cherished memories and generous gifts. However, Lila and Louise remain behind. Despite the perfect wedding, Letitia's heart feels heavy. Beneath her composed smile lies a lingering sense of unease. She is still wrestling with the weight of expectations, self-restraint, and the lingering embarrassment from her first evening with Clark. Every time the memory surfaces, her cheeks flush with shame. Even the sheep and ducks nearby seem to mock her, making sounds that resemble laughter. That night after the wedding, Clark had calmly joined Letitia on their shared bed. She had pulled the blankets tightly over herself, bracing for the unknown. Her heart had pounded wildly, convinced that something scandalous was imminent. But Clark had merely laughed at her nervous state. His laughter had not been cruel, but affectionate, as though amused by her overactive imagination. He had reassured her that there was no rush, suggesting they both get some well-deserved rest after the exhausting day. With that, he had fallen asleep, keeping a respectful distance. Letitia had never felt so foolish. Her overreaction haunted her, and the embarrassment lingered. Later that day, Brianna paid Letitia a visit, bringing along a mischievous gift, a sheer, see-through nightgown. The boldness of the garment made her refuse the gift, trying to hand it off to Maria, who protested furiously, clearly unamused by the gesture. The laughter that erupted between them felt nostalgic. Unbeknownst to her, Clark watches from his study, gazing at her through the open window. Though they are now husband and wife, Clark still finds himself drawn to her laughter, unable to shake the habit of observing her from afar. It is a habit formed long ago, one he has no intention of breaking. Nader soon interrupts Clark's peaceful watch, his tone laced with curiosity. He eagerly asks when the kingdom might expect an heir, but Clark sheepishly admits that he has yet to touch Letitia. Despite a week having passed since their wedding, their relationship remains innocent. Nader stares at Clark, dumbfounded. His frustration is evident as he rubs his temples, already sensing the future headaches the couple will bring. Elsewhere, Louise makes his way toward Letitia's quarters, eager to stir up some amusement. As he steps inside, however, Letitia catches him off guard. With a mischievous grin, she grabs the scandalous nightgown and tosses it over his head, momentarily blinding him. Before he can protest, she tickles him mercilessly, sending him onto the bed. Louise tries to insult Letitia, demanding an apology, but Letitia stands her ground, attempting to assert her authority as a princess. Her confidence wavers, and her words come out awkward and stuttered, much to Louise's amusement. Maria watches their exchange, and she comments on how much they resemble siblings. The remark sparks a mischievous idea in Letitia's mind. Seizing the opportunity, she declares that she has always wanted a little sister. Using her status as a princess, she commands Lily to apply makeup on Louise, transforming him into a picture-perfect younger sister. Louise protests, but his resistance is futile. The girls gush uncontrollably as Lily's skilled hands work quickly, bringing out Louise's naturally delicate features. To complete the look, Brianna lets him wear one of the dresses she carries around for sale. Brianna also offers some of her dresses to Maria and Lily, and even tries to push Letitia to buy more of her see-through clothes. Clark unexpectedly arrives and casually suggests purchasing 10 of Brianna's revealing nightgowns, much to Letitia's horror. Brianna eagerly agrees, pleased by the prospect of a successful sale. Letitia, however, is mortified. Without a second thought, she drags Clark away to confront him privately. She also sternly orders the remaining boys to return to their quarters. Despite their protests, she remains firm, refusing to be embarrassed even further. Meanwhile, young Matthias, who had been confined to his room, successfully sneaks out. He quietly navigates through the castle, his small footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Eventually, he arrives at the portrait gallery, where a large painting of Clark and Letitia as children stands prominently, and though no one is present to hear him, Matthias whispers a silent vow to the portrait. In his hands, he clutches a small wand. Unbeknownst to him, Layla soon discovers his absence. Panic spreads quickly through the castle as servants rush to search for the young prince. Letitia, upon hearing the news, insists that she and her trusted companions, Lily and Maria, join the search. She assures Layla that they will bring Matthias back safely, urging her to rest. Determined to find him, the three women come through the castle grounds, their eyes scanning every corner, and soon joined by the entire staff of the castle. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the castle, Letitia stands on the balcony, contemplating where Matthias might have gone. Her gaze shifts to the butterfly enclosure, the very spot where Clark had once found her when they were children. The memory sparks a realization. Without hesitation, she hurries to the secluded garden, calling Matthias' name as she enters the enclosed space. The vibrant fluttering of butterflies surrounds her, but it is the sight of Matthias crouched among the bushes that captures her attention. His small frame is partially hidden, his expression both defiant and troubled. Letitia gently urges him to return to the castle, but Matthias refuses to budge, unwilling to share the reason behind his escape. Recognizing his determination, Letitia chooses not to press further. Instead, she settles down beside him, the cool grass beneath her. To ease his mind, she begins to tell a story, the tale of the adventurer Dale and his 3 sons. Matthias listens intently, his eyes wide with wonder. The story of the youngest son who befriended a Milo cub captivates him, momentarily lifting the weight of whatever had driven him to run away. Matthias grows fascinated by the idea of going on an adventure. His excitement sparks an idea in Letitia's mind, and she suddenly remembers the map Queen Laura had given her. She pulls it from her pocket, presenting it to Matthias with a gleam of curiosity in her eyes. As they both examine the map, Letitia notices peculiar markings along its edges. Her curiosity intensifies as she flips it over, revealing a hidden message written in elegant script. The words read, "May your smile and happiness shine brightly, no matter what storms come your way." A soft smile spreads across Letitia's face as she realizes that the map is not just an ordinary map, but a heartfelt letter from the Queen. She then looks back at Matthias, who eagerly awaits her response, and with a determined glint in her eyes, she promises him that one day they will go on a grand adventure together to seek treasure. Matthias beams at the thought, his heart swelling with excitement. But as the thrill of the moment passes, he remembers the reason he ran away in the first place. Reaching into his small satchel, he carefully pulls out Letitia's treasured music box. Clark had shown Matthias the damaged box, explaining his plans to have it repaired. However, with Clark's royal duties piling up, the task had fallen to the wayside. Matthias, determined to bring joy back to Letitia, decided to take matters into his own hands. His plan was to find a skilled craftsman to fix the music box, but each time he tried to leave the castle, the guards would catch him and send him back to his room. Letitia is deeply touched by Matthias's determination. Tears gather in her eyes as she pulls him into a tight embrace, overwhelmed by the young prince's selfless act. His unwavering desire to see her happy is a gesture she will never forget. As the sun sets and darkness blankets the castle, Clark grows increasingly concerned. He makes his way to the butterfly enclosure, sensing that Letitia might have gone there. Upon his arrival, he finds Letitia and Matthias peacefully curled up on the grass. A soft smile tugs at Clark's lips as he signals to Sebastian, informing him that the search is over. Letitia is gently brought back to her chambers. When she stirs awake, she finds Clark sitting beside her, a book in his hands. She immediately asks about Matthias, and Clark reassures her that the young prince is fast asleep in his own room. The sense of relief settles over her, though it is quickly replaced by a rush of affection as she gazes at Clark. Overwhelmed by her emotions, she reaches out and softly caresses his face. Her fingertips trace along his jawline, and just as she gathers the courage to confess her feelings, a sudden wave of shyness overtakes her, hiding her face beneath the blankets in embarrassment. Clark chuckles at her reaction, amused by her endearing display. Despite her flustered state, Letitia eventually peeks out from beneath the covers. She quickly leans forward, pressing a shy kiss to Clark's cheek before retreating once more. However, Clark wraps his arms around her, pulling her close. His gentle laughter reverberates through the room, and Letitia turns to face him, her curiosity piqued. Clark admits that the series of events leading to this moment has been nothing short of amusing. From the countless misunderstandings to Letitia's dramatic antics, he can't help but find humor in it all. Letitia, though initially offended by his words, softens when Clark explains further. He assures her that every chaotic moment, every laugh, and every tear has become a cherished memory. Her presence has brought a vibrancy to his life that he never thought possible, and for that, he is eternally grateful. Their gazes linger as they grow closer, and soon their lips meet in a tender kiss. Encouraged by the warmth between them, he attempts to deepen their intimacy. However, Letitia's nervousness overtakes her. Panicked, she abruptly pushes him away, her voice trembling as she insists that she might faint if they go any further. Clark, though slightly surprised, responds with a soft chuckle, suggesting they simply go to sleep instead. That night, Letitia sleeps soundly for the first time in a while. Without realizing it, she rolls over to Clark's side of the bed, carelessly sprawling across him. Clark remains perfectly still, admitting to the audience that he actually did not sleep. A few mornings later, Letitia and Clark stand before the grand portrait of their younger selves that hangs proudly in the castle hall. She asks if Clark would still chase after her even now that they are married. Clark's response is gentle yet unwavering. He assures her that no matter how many years pass, he will always pursue her with the same devotion and determination. His gaze softens as he looks into her eyes, cherishing the bond they share. As if sealing his promise, Clark playfully calls her by her full royal title, formally inviting her to dance, and they sway together in a simple, elegant dance. However, Letitia's playful side soon takes over. She suddenly releases Clark, causing him to stumble and fall. He looks up at her in disbelief. The sparkle in her eyes quickly brings a smile to his lips. Letitia teasingly uses his own full title in return. She extends her hand to him, which he takes without hesitation, unable to stay upset. They make their way using their horses through the castle grounds. The warm sunlight bathes the gardens in a golden glow as they dash playfully toward the open lawn. The royal family watches fondly from a distance, along with the castle's servants and the familiar faces who have accompanied them on their journey. Laughter and cheerful chatter fill the air as their friends, already gathered for a lively picnic, wave them over. Letitia and Clark pause for a moment, and before joining their friends, they close the distance between them. They lean in, their lips meeting in a gentle kiss.